Welcome to the story. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and support me. Bruce Banner stood in a sterile glass enclosed laboratory, the hum of advanced equipment vibrating beneath his feet. His fingers hovered over the keyboard, eyes flicking back and forth between a series of complex data lines and the glowing screen. This experiment was supposed to be the breakthrough, a new way to harness gamma radiation in a controlled, stable manner, something that could finally give him the ability to control the Hulk. The green beast had been dormant for a while, kept in check by Bruce's meditative efforts, but the shadow of its rage was never far from his mind today. Maybe things would change. But something felt off. There was a charge in the air that he couldn't quite explain. Outside the glass, New York buzzed with its usual chaotic energy, but within the lab, there was an eerie quiet, like the city itself was holding its breath. Just one more calculation. Jared, Bruce muttered to himself, typing rapidly as the computer simulated the results of the gamma field test. He'd run this experiment in controlled environments before, remote labs, underground facilities, miles from any human life, but now here in the city, he could feel the weight of potential disaster pressing on him. "You're playing with fire again, Bruce." Suddenly, the monitors flickered. A sharp, high-pitched whine pierced the air, and before Bruce could react, an alarm blared through the lab. Red lights flashed, bathing everything in a sickly glow. No, Bruce yelled, slamming his hands on the control panel as the gamma core surged. The energy levels spiked far beyond what should have been possible. Sparks flew from the machines, and the air grew hot with radiation. Bruce felt the pressure building, not just in the room, but in his chest, deep in his muscles where the Hulk waited for any excuse to break free. His thoughts raced. He had seconds, maybe less. He slammed his fist into the emergency shutdown button. Nothing happened. Panic flared, but he forced himself to breathe, to stay calm. Another pulse of gamma energy hit him, and he felt the beast stirring, clawing at the walls of his mind. With a roar, the core exploded in a pulse of green energy, a wave of gamma radiation that surged through the lab and blasted out into the city. The walls buckled and glass shattered, but Bruce didn't hear any of it. He only felt the Hulk ripping through his control, rising to the surface as the wave engulfed him. Across the city, Peter Parker swung effortlessly between skyscrapers, the wind rushing past his masked face. It had been a slow day for Spider-Man, a few muggers, a carjacking, and a minor scuffle outside a deluxe. Nothing out of the ordinary, but that uneasy feeling had been crawling up his spine all day, a strange buzzing in the back of his head, like his spider sense was trying to tell him something important, but couldn't he quite get through. "Relax, Pete," he muttered to himself as he shot another web, gliding smoothly through the air, instead of probably just the pizza from last night. But he couldn't shake it. The feeling was growing stronger, gnawing at him, and he found his swings speeding up, his movements becoming more erratic as his nerves tightened. Then it hit. The wave of gamma radiation washed over him mid-swing. It was like nothing he'd ever felt before, a searing, invisible force that gripped his entire body. His spider sense went haywire, overwhelming him with warning signals, but before he could process any of it, his muscles locked, and he crashed into the side of a building, barely able to shoot a web to break his fall. Dazed, Peter rolled onto a rooftop, clutching his head as a wave of nausea hit him. He tried to stand, but his legs felt like they were made of lead. His vision swam, and he could feel something wrong deep inside him, something shifting, changing. His hands trembled as he pulled off his mask, desperate for air. What the hell was that? The city around him seemed normal, but Peter knew better. His powers, his senses, everything felt off. His strength had surged in those few seconds, his muscles bulging beneath his suit in ways they never had before. But along with that power came a feeling of instability, like he was on the verge of snapping. "Great," he muttered, wiping the sweat from his brow. "Just what I need. More problems." He staggered to his feet, his thoughts racing. He needed answers, and there was only one person in the city who could possibly help him make sense of what just happened. Back in the wreckage of his lab, Bruce Banner stood amidst the destruction, breathing heavily. He had managed to stop the Hulk's transformation at the last second, but it had been close. Too close, the gamma wave had already done its damage, spreading through the city like a ripple in a pond, touching thousands of lives in ways they couldn't yet comprehend. He ran a hand through his hair, grimacing as he surveyed the ruined equipment. This wasn't just a malfunction. It was a catastrophe. People would start changing, mutating just like him. He had to fix this and fast before the city descended into chaos. His phone buzzed in his pocket, and he fished it out, still dazed from the adrenaline. The screen flashed with a name he hadn't expected. Peter Parker. Banner, he answered, trying to keep his voice steady. Bruce, it's me. I need help. Something happened. Peter's voice was shaky and steady, and Bruce could hear the strain in every word. Bruce, how did it sink? You felt it too. Felt it. I was in it. My powers, they reached different, stronger, but I can't control it. Something seriously wrong. Bruce closed his eyes, the weight of the situation pressing down on him like a ton of brick. He had to tell Peter the truth, but it wasn't going to be easy. Peter, he said, his voice low, I think you were hit by a gamma wave, the same radiation that affects me. There was a pause on the other end of the line. You were telling me I got Hulk. Not exactly, but close. The gamma radiation hit your DNA. It amplified your powers, but it's also destabilizing them. We need to meet now. Peter arrived at Bruce Ed Temporary Lab, an underground facility far from the devastation of the city above. He still felt shaky, his body thrumming with raw energy. His enhanced strength was evident. With every movement, he could feel the pavement crack slightly under his feet as he landed, the world around him seeming smaller, lighter. Bruce greeted him with a grim expression, looking haggard and stressed, clearly rattled from the events of the day. We don't have much time, Bruce said, motioning Peter inside. If the gamma wave affected you, it probably affected a lot more people. Peter ran a hand through his hair, pacing the length of the lab. I've already felt it, Bruce. I was almost too strong for myself to handle today. And I am not just talking about physical strength. My emotions, man, I am on edge, angry, frustrated, like I am about to lose it. Bruce nodded. That's send the gamma radiation. It affects your mind just as much as your body. And it doesn't help that your spider genes were already mutated. This is ... It's amplifying everything. And you didn't think to mention that your experiment might turn people into mini Hulks? Peter shot back, the bite in his tone sharper than he intended. Bruce's jaw tightened. This wasn't supposed to happen. I was trying to help people, not turn them into monsters. Peter sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. Yeah, well, welcome to the club. So what do we do? Bruce walked over to a console, tapping rapidly on the key. A holographic display flickered to life, showing a map of New York City, red dots spreading out from the epicenter of the gamma explosion. These are the affected areas, Bruce explained. Every red dot is someone who's showing signs of mutation. Some of them will be minor, like increased strength or endurance, but others, they might be more like me. Peter stared at the map, the enormity of the situation hitting him like a punch to the gut. So you were saying there's a bunch of potential Hulks running around the city and we have no idea what they were capable of. Exactly. Bruce said grimly, and if we don't find a way to reverse this, it's only going to get worse. These mutations are unstable. People will start losing control just like you, feeling right now. Peter clenched his fists, the surge of power coursing through him again. He could feel the anger rising, a deep-seated frustration that he wasn't used to dealing with. It was like his emotions were on overdrive, pushing him toward the edge. Peter stood behind him, restless, energy rippling under his skin, a reminder of how close to the edge he was. He wasn't too used to feeling so out of control, even with all his powers. His spider sense usually kept him grounded. But now, every nerve in his body felt raw, his emotions a volatile mix of frustration and anger, and it was getting worse by the minute. We don't have much time, Bruce muttered, staring at the screen. These mutations are progressing faster than I thought. The people affected, they were going to lose control. Peter's fist slammed into the wall beside him, the sound reverberating through the lab. He didn't mean to hit it that hard, it just happened. The metal buckled under his strength, crumpling like paper, and Peter stared at it, horrified at his own reaction. He started, but Bruce waved him off. It's on the gamma, Bruce said, not looking up from the screen. I've been there, Peter. I know what it feels like. But you have to stay focused. If you lose control, we were both in trouble. Peter clenched his jaw, forcing himself to take a deep breath. He could feel the anger simmering beneath the surface, but he couldn't let it take over. Not now, not with everything at stake. Okay, Peter said, his voice low. What? Set the plan. Bruce tapped a few more keys, bringing up a schematic of the city. We need to find the source of the gamma radiation. It's still active. That's why the mutations are spreading. If we can shut it down, we might be able to stop the changes before they become permanent. Peter nodded, trying to focus. And how do we do that? Bruce pointed to a building on the map not far from where the explosion had occurred. The gamma core is still unstable. If we can get inside and overload it, we might be able to create a reverse wave, something to neutralize the radiation. But it's dangerous. The core is volatile, to say the least. Dangerous said, raising an eyebrow. Bruce, you were talking to the guy who gets shot at by guys with laser guns on a regular basis. I can handle dangerous. Bruce allowed himself a small smile. Yeah, well, this is a different kind of dangerous. The core said, emitting high levels of radiation, even with your powers. It's going to be a risk. Peter shrugged. Sounds like a Tuesday. Bruce glanced at him, and for a moment, Peter could see the worry in his eyes. But they didn't have time to dwell on it. The city was falling apart, and they were the only ones who could stop it. All right, Bruce said, pulling up more data on the core. We'll go in together. I'll handle the science part. You keep the mutants off us. Peter grinned behind his mask. Deal. Let Sesh go save the city. They didn't need to waste any time. Bruce led the way out of the lab, his mind racing with calculations and contingency plans. Peter followed close behind, the adrenaline starting to kick in. As they made their way through the streets, the damage from the gamma wave became more and more evident. Cars were overturned, windows shattered, and people, or what was left of them, wandered aimlessly, their bodies twisted and deformed by the radiation. One man, hunched over and barely recognizable, stumbled toward them, his skin a sickly green and his eyes wild with anger. Peter stepped forward, ready to intervene, but Bruce held up a hand. Wait, Bruce said softly. He's not fully transformed yet. The man groaned, his muscles bulging under his tattered clothes. He looked like he was about to charge at them, but something in Bruce's voice stopped him. We're going to help you, Bruce said, keeping his voice calm and steady. Just stay still. But the man wasn't listening. With a guttural roar, he lunged at them, his massive hands outstretched. Peter moved instinctively, webbing the men's arms to the ground before he could reach them. Sorry, big guy, Peter said, tightening the webbing. You were sitting this one out. The man thrashed against the webs, but Peter's chest strength had increased tenfold since the wave. The webs held, and the man eventually stopped struggling, collapsing in a heap on the pavement. Bruce knelt beside him, checking his vitals. He's stable, but for how long? I don't know. Peter looked around at the destruction. This is getting out of hand. We need to stop this now. They reached the building Bruce had indicated on the map. It was a nondescript structure, tucked between towering skyscrapers, but the air around it hummed with energy. Peter could feel it in his bones. The gamma radiation was stronger here, more concentrated. Bruce led the way inside the building, science power flickering as they passed through the main entrance. The core was deep underground beneath layers of reinforced steel and lead, but even that wasn't high enough to contain the radiation. As they descended, Peter could feel the pressure building, the energy in the air thickening with every step. When they reached the core room, Bruce stopped short. The doors were sealed, but even from here, Peter could see the glow of green light seeping through the crack. The core was unstable, pulsing with energy, and it was only a matter of time before it blew. All right, Bruce said, taking a deep breath here, saying the plan. I am going to overload the core. When that happens, we need to get out fast. The reverse wave will neutralize the gamma radiation, but it's going to create a shock wave. If we reach too close, Peter nodded. Got it. Do your thing. I'll handle the rest. Bruce approached the control panel, his hands steady as he input the command. The core responded instantly, its glow intensifying as Bruce manipulated the energy level. Peter stood at the ready, senses on high alert. He could feel the danger, the tension in the air. This was going to be close. Suddenly, the doors to the core room burst open, and a group of mutated citizens stormed in. Their bodies were grotesque, hulking forms twisted by the gamma radiation, their faces contorted in rage. Looks like we've got company, Peter said, stepping forward. Bruce didn't look up from the control panel. Just keep them off me. Peter grinned, launching himself at the first mutant with a burst of speed. His enhanced strength made short work of the group, but the fight wasn't easy. Every punch, every web, every move took more out of him than he expected. The gamma mutation had made them stronger, too, and more dangerous. He could feel the anger rising again, that dark edge creeping into his thought. His movements became more aggressive, more reckless, as he fought to keep control. But the power coursing through him was intoxicating, and for a brief moment he almost lost himself to it. Peter, Bruce, the voice cut through the haze. Focus. Peter shook his head, forcing himself to stay grounded. He couldn't lose control. Not now, not when they were so close. With one final, powerful web shot, he took down the last of the mutants, pinning them to the ground. His chest heaved as he caught his breath, the adrenaline still surging through him, but the fight wasn't over yet. "I've almost got it," Bruce said, his fingers flying across the control panel. The core pulsed, the green light intensifying until it was almost blinding. The building shook as the energy level spiked, the air crackling with power. "Bruce, now would be a good time to tell me we're almost done," Peter called, his voice strained. "Just a few more seconds." The core began to hum, the sound growing louder and louder until it was a deafening roar. Peter could feel the shockwave building, the pressure in the air reaching a breaking point. "Got it," Bruce shouted, slamming his hand down on the final button. The core erupted in a burst of light, the shockwave ripping through the room. Peter barely had time to react before the wave hit him, knocking him off his feet and sending him crashing into the wall. The world went white for a moment, his senses overwhelmed by the sheer force of the explosion. When the dust finally settled, Peter groaned, pushing himself to his feet. The room was in ruins, debris scattered everywhere, but the core was silent. The pulsing green light was gone, replaced by a faint, steady hum. "We did it," Bruce said, his voice barely audible over the ringing in Peter's ear. Peter nodded, still catching his breath. "Yeah, we did." The wave had worked, the gamma radiation was neutralized, and the mutations would stop spreading. But as Peter looked down at his hands, still trembling from the surge of power, he knew that the effects on him might be permanent. "Bruce," Peter said, his voice quiet, "what about me?" Bruce looked at him, a mixture of relief and concern in his eye. "I don't know, Peter, your mutation, it might not go away. You're stronger now, but that instability, it's going to be with you for a while." Peter sighed, pulling his mask back over his face. "Great, just what I needed." Welcome to the story. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and support me. The roar of the city pulsed through the streets of New York, a cacophony of car horns, chattering crowds, and the distant rumble of the subway beneath it all. It was a warm summer evening, and the air hummed with energy as people hurried down the avenues, chasing whatever dreams or disasters awaited them in the next hour. For Peter Parker, that meant a stop at the corner deli for a sandwich before his patrol as Spider-Man. Swinging into an alleyway, Peter ducked behind a dumpster, pulling off his mask as he checked his phone. One message from Aunt May and 3 missed calls from MJ. He'd have to deal with that later. First food. Just as he bit into his sandwich, the ground beneath him shook violently. His spidey senses tingled with a warning that came seconds too late. A deafening explosion rocked the area, and Peter dropped his sandwich, bolting up and scrambling toward the source of the chaos. In the distance, smoke billowed into the sky near Times Square, a dark cloud rising against the orange sunset. His instincts screamed at him. Whatever was happening, it wasn't just an ordinary accident. Great, so much for dinner. He pulled his mask back on, leaped onto the wall of the nearest building, and swung out into the city. As he soared through the streets, weaving between skyscrapers, the sound of screaming grew louder. Flames flickered below, cars swerved to avoid the wreckage, and Peter's eyes widened as he caught sight of the cause. In the heart of Times Square, among the crumpled remains of taxis and debris, stood creatures, hulking, grotesque forms with glowing green skin. They were massive, each one towering over the crowd, like living juggernauts, their muscles bulging and pulsing with an otherworldly energy. Their roars echoed off the buildings as they swatted at anything that moved. "Okay, that's new," Peter muttered under his breath as he landed on a nearby rooftop, watching in disbelief as one of the creatures picked up a car and tossed it across the square like a toy. "Where's the Hulk when you need him?" He didn't wait for an answer. With a flick of his wrist, he fired a web line and swung down toward the creatures, his heart pounding. He'd dealt with big, strong enemies before: Rhino Lizard, heck, even Sandman, but this was something else. These creatures weren't just strong, they were fast, adaptive, and seemingly immune to damage. Spider-Man swooped low, aiming his web shooters at one of the creature's legs. Sticky strands of webbing wrapped around its knee, and with a yank, Peter pulled hard, trying to trip the monster. It barely budged. Instead, it turned its head toward him, eyes glowing with the same eerie green light, and lunged. Peter barely dodged the blow, flipping over the creature's massive arm and landing a solid kick to its chest. His foot made contact with a sickening crunch, but the creature barely flinched. In fact, it seemed to grow larger, its muscles swelling even more as it roared in frustration. "Okay, that's not fair," Peter muttered, ducking beneath a swing that would have turned him into paste. He fired another line of webbing at a nearby lamppost, using it to launch himself upward and out of the creature. 3. As he soared above the chaos, Peter scanned the scene. There were more of them, at least 6, maybe 7, and they were wreaking havoc, tearing through buildings, cars, and anything else in their path. The police had already arrived, but their bullets bounced harmlessly off the creature's skin, and their efforts to contain the situation were futile. The creature seemed unstoppable. Just then, a loud crash echoed through the square, and Peter turned just in time to see a figure slam into the ground with the force of a small earthquake. Dust and debris flew into the air, and when it settled, standing in the crater was none other than the Hulk. Finally, Peter sighed in relief. The Hulk wasted no time. With a thunderous roar, he charged at the nearest creature, fists clenched. The impact was seismic, the ground quaking beneath their feet as Hulk collided with the monster. For a moment, it looked like the Hulk had the upper hand, driving the creature back with sheer brute force. But then, just like before, the creature began to change. Its muscles grew larger, its body adapted, and soon it was matching Hulk's strength blow for blow. Peter swung down to join the fray, landing beside the giant green Avenger. "Hey, big guy, glad you could join the party. Any idea what these things are?" Hulk grunted as he grabbed one of the creatures by the throat and slammed it into the ground. Number Hulk smash. "Yeah, I figured that was the plan." Spider-Man shot a web at another creature, yanking it off balance. "But these things, they're readapting like some kind of sick evolution on steroids." Hulk let out a growl of frustration as the creature he'd just thrown stood back up, seemingly unharmed. Hulk smash harder. That's the spirit. Despite their combined efforts, it quickly became clear that the creatures weren't going down easily. Every time Hulk or Spider-Man landed a blow, the creatures got stronger, faster, more resilient. It was as if they were learning with each hit, evolving into something even more dangerous. After what felt like an eternity of fighting, Spider-Man and Hulk managed to drive the creatures into the sewers beneath the city. The chaos on the surface began to subside, but Peter's eyes, mind raced with questions. Where had these creatures come from? Why were they so similar to the Hulk in appearance and power? And most importantly, how could they stop them? Back on the surface, the city was in shambles. The authorities had cordoned off the area, and emergency services were working to evacuate civilians. Peter removed his mask and caught his breath, his heart still pounding from the adrenaline. Hulk, now back in his Bruce Banner form, approached him, wiping dust from his glasses. "Those creatures, their DNA, it's like too close to mine. Someone sent and experimented." Peter frowned. Bruce nodded grimly. "It looks that way, but they don't understand what they were dealing with. My transformation, it's not just about strength. It sounds uncontrollable, dangerous. Even it's in the state, but..." Peter's eyes widened as he processed the information. But why now, and why release them in the middle of New York? That's what we need to find out. With the help of Tony Stark-Sheriff's tech back at Avengers HQ, Bruce and Peter analyzed the DNA sample Bruce had taken from one of the creatures. As the data scrolled across the screen, Peter's stomach churned. The DNA was an almost perfect match to Bruce's, except for one critical difference. It was engineered. Someone had tampered with it, modifying Bruce's already unstable gamma-irradiated genes to create something entirely new. "Looks like they were trying to make super soldiers," Peter muttered, shaking his head. "I've seen this kind of thing before. People always think they can control it. They never can." Bruce stared at the screen, his face a mixture of anger and fear. "This has my DNA all over it. Whoever did this, they used me." Peter put a hand on Bruce's shoulder. "We'll stop them together." Their investigation led them deep into the underbelly of New York, tracking clues that pointed to a long-abandoned military facility on the outskirts of the city. The facility had once been used for gamma research, Bruce's old stomping ground, but it had been shut down years ago after the government deemed it too dangerous to continue experimenting with the Hulk's powers. The facility was eerily quiet as they approached, overgrown with weeds and rusting metal. Peter glanced at Bruce, who was already beginning to tense up. He could sense the Hulk lurking just beneath the surface, ready to burst out at the slightest provocation. "Okay," Peter asked. Bruce nodded, though his jaw was clenched. "Yeah, let's get this over with." Inside the facility was a labyrinth of dark hallways and abandoned labs. The air was thick with dust, and every step echoed off the walls, making it feel like the place was alive. As they ventured deeper, they found evidence of recent activity footprints in the dust, computer terminals that had been powered on, and discarded vials labeled with ominous symbols. Finally, they reached the heart of the facility, a massive underground lab filled with rows of containment pods. Most were empty, but a few still held the grotesque mutated creatures they had been fighting. At the far end of the lab, a man stood hunched over a terminal, typing furiously. He did hear them approach, too engrossed in his work. Bruce's stiff fists clenched as he recognized the man, Dr. Malcolm Reedus. He growled, "I should have known." Peter tilted his head. "Friend of yours?" "Hardly. He was part of my research team years ago, obsessed with the idea of harnessing my power. He was always pushing the limits, trying to use my DNA for that." Dr. Reedus finally turned, startled by their presence. His face twisted into a sneer as he saw Bruce. "Dr. Banner, I was wondering when you do show up." "What the hell have you done?" Bruce's voice was low, dangerous. He took a step forward, fists tightening as the tension in the air thickened. Peter glanced between them, his senses on high alert. Dr. Malcolm Reedus, unperturbed by the Hulk's growing presence, smiled, a smile devoid of warmth, filled with arrogance. "I've done what you couldn't time, Banner. I perfected your formula. I have created an army, a new breed of soldiers, stronger than the Hulk, smarter, faster, and completely under control." His eyes gleamed with madness, his voice filled with pride. "Do you have any idea how much the world will pay for this kind of power? I've made history." Bruce's breath quickened, and Peter could feel the shift in the air. The Hulk was coming. Peter stepped between them, trying to defuse the situation before it turned into another battle. "Hold on," Dr. Reedus says. "You call this under control. Those things out there, your new breed of soldiers. They nearly tore the city apart. They were not soldiers. They re-monstered. Minor setbacks," Reedus sneered, waving a dismissive hand. "A few adjustments, a little fine-tuning, and they'll be perfect." Bruce took another step forward, and Peter felt the ground tremble. "You insane. You think you can control what I couldn't. You have no idea what you've on." Dr. Reedus' smile faltered just for a second. Control Banner. "That's where you and I differ. I am not afraid of the power. I embrace it." With that, Reedus reached for a syringe on the table behind him and plunged it into his arm. The transformation was immediate. His body convulsed as the serum spread through his veins, muscles bulging grotesquely, skin turning a sickly shade of green. His bones cracked and shifted as his form grew larger and more monstrous by the second. Peter took a step back, his eyes wide. "Well, that's not good." Dr. Reedus let out a guttural roar as the transformation completed, standing now as a hulking, grotesque version of the Hulk, but with something darker, more chaotic about him. His eyes glowed with the same eerie green light as the creatures they'd fought in the streets, but there was a cold intelligence behind them. This wasn't just brute strength. This was something far worse. Reedus laughed, the sound deep and twisted. "Now, Banner, let's see who the real monster is." The fight began instantly. Reedus charged at Bruce with the speed and ferocity of a beast, unleashed, smashing through the lab's equipment like it was nothing. Bruce transformed into the Hulk in a flash, meeting Reedus' charge head-on, their collision shaking the very foundation of the facility. Peter scrambled to avoid the debris, his mind racing as he tried to figure out how to help without getting crushed. The two giants clashed in a brutal display of power, their fists crashing into each other with the force of wrecking ball. Hulk slammed Reedus into the wall, causing the entire structure to shudder, but Reedus retaliated with a savage uppercut that sent Hulk crashing through several pieces of machinery. Despite the damage, the lab was holding barely, but the fight was tearing it apart. Peter swung into action, firing web after web at Reedus, trying to slow him down. The webbing stuck, but Reedus tore through it with ease, laughing as if the attempts to stop him were nothing more than annoyances. Peter zipped around the lab, staying out of reach, while desperately searching for anything that could turn the tide. "We can't keep this up," Peter shouted to Hulk, who was in the midst of grappling with Reedus. "He's getting stronger." Hulk growled, struggling to hold Reedus in place as the monstrous scientist twisted and fought back, Hulk smash harder. Yeah, we were gonna need more than smashing, Peter retorted, dodging a flying piece of debris. Rias was relentless, his new form giving him a frightening advantage. Unlike the Hulk, who was bound by Bruce and underlying humanity, Rias had no such restraint. He fought with wild abandon, his blows landing with terrifying precision. With each hit, Hulk seemed to weaken, while Rias only grew more vicious. Peter's eyes darted around the lab, and then he saw the gamma chamber in the corner, still intact, despite the destruction. An idea sparked in his mind. It was risky, but it might just work. Hulk, Peter shouted, swinging toward the chamber. Get him into the gamma chamber. We can overload him with gamma radiation. Hulk glanced toward Peter, then at the chamber, and gave a short, sharp nod. With a massive heave, he threw Rias across the lab, sending him crashing into the far wall. Without wasting a second, Hulk lunged after him, grabbing the monstrous scientist by the neck and dragging him toward the chamber. Rias struggled, thrashing wildly, but Hulk's grip was like iron. He slammed Rias into the chamber, holding him in place as Peter quickly sealed the door. Rias pounded on the glass, roaring in fury, but it was too late. The chamber began to hum, the gamma radiation building inside. Are you sure about this? Peter asked, his voice tight with tension. I mean, you read the expert, but what if this makes him stronger? Hulk shook his head, his face grim. Too much gamma will destroy him. Peter swallowed hard. Okay, here goes. Nothing. He hit the control panel, and the chamber lit up with a blinding green light. Inside, Rias screamed in agony as the gamma energy surged through him. His body convulsed, swelling grotesquely before suddenly collapsing in on itself. The light intensified, and then with a deafening crack, the glass shattered. Peter shielded his eyes as the chamber exploded, sending a shockwave through the lab. When the dust settled, Rias was lying on the ground, back in his human form, unconscious and barely breathing. Hulk stood over him, breathing heavily, his massive form casting a long shadow over the broken scientist. Peter lowered his arms, cautiously stepping forward. Is it over? Hulk glanced down at Rias, then gave a slow, heavy nod. It's over. Peter let out a long breath, his shoulders sagging with relief. While that was intense, Hulk grunted, then transformed back into Bruce, who immediately staggered, exhausted from the battle. Peter rushed to his side, helping him stay upright. You okay? Hey, Peter asked, concern in his voice. Bruce nodded weakly. Yeah, just tired. Together they made their way out of the ruined lab, the echoes of the battle still ringing in their ears. The facility was a wreck, but they had stopped the threat for now. Outside, the sky was beginning to lighten, the first hints of dawn creeping over the horizon. As they emerged from the facility, they were met by a swarm of emergency responders and said, Healed agents? Director Nick Fury himself was there, his expression as unreadable as ever. Good work, both of you, Fury said, his tone gruff but sincere. We'll take it from here. Bruce nodded, his eyes hollow with exhaustion. Guess he was trying to replicate the Hulk. He used my DNA. We need to destroy all the data. Fury gave a sharp nod. Consider it done. We'll make sure nothing like this happens again. Peter couldn't help but feel a twinge of doubt at Fury's word. They heard promises like that before, but for now, at least the immediate danger had passed. As the chaos subsided and the authorities took control of the scene, Peter and Bruce walked away from the wreckage. The city would rebuild as it always did, but the scars left by Rias' experiment would linger. Hey, Bruce, Peter said, breaking the silence as they made their way down a quiet street. You ever think about how much simpler life would be if we just, didn't have to deal with giant gamma-mutated monsters? Bruce chuckled, softly shaking his head. If only it were that easy. Peter grinned under his masks. Well, at least we make a good team. Hulk, Smash, Praetor Man, Webs. We should do this more often. Bruce gave him a tired smile. Let's just hope we don't have to. As they parted ways, Peter watched Bruce disappear into the crowd, his thoughts already turning to the next challenge. The world was always on the brink of another disaster, another villain, another fight. But for now, the monsters had been defeated, and New York, battered and bruised, would keep moving forward. And so would he. Welcome to the story. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and support me. The hum of machinery filled the lab as Peter Parker adjusted his goggle. The glare from the gamma ray apparatus cast a faint green light on his face, reflecting his fatigue. He had been here for hours, fine-tuning his latest project, a device meant to help him control his spider ability. Lately, the line between Peter Parker and Spider-Man had been blurring in a way that made him uneasy. His reflexes had become hypersensitive. His webs shot from his wrists without command, and his strength, though useful, was beginning to cause more harm than good. Today's experiment was meant to fix that, at least in theory. But theories had a way of betraying you, and Peter couldn't shake the gnawing feeling that something was about to go wrong. He glanced at the glowing monitor, checking the gamma output one last time before hitting the switch. The burst of energy surged through the room, faster and brighter than Peter had anticipated. A searing pain shot through his arm as the gamma radiation washed over him, the air crackling with electric intensity. He yanked off his goggles, stumbling backward, his spider sense flaring in a way it never had before. His skin buzzed, his muscles twitched, and a dull roar filled his ear. Not good, Peter muttered, clutching his arm. He struggled to stand upright, his legs feeling like jelly beneath him. His enhanced vision blurred as the world tilted sideways before he could process what was happening. The pain vanished, but something else replaced it. A deep, pulsating sensation ran through his veins. His spider abilities had always felt like an extension of himself, a sixth sense that guided him. Now it felt as though his powers had turned on him. He clenched his fists, forcing himself to focus. The gamma radiation had done something to him. He needed help fast. Across town, Bruce Banner sat in the shadows of a dimly lit motel room, tapping the screen of his tablet, his brow furrowed. He hadn't slept in days, and it showed. His eyes were bloodshot, his hands trembling. For years, Bruce had managed to keep the Hulk under control, at least most of the time. But something had shifted in the past few weeks. The transformations had started happening more frequently, more violently. Even when he wasn't here angry, he could feel the creature stirring inside him, clawing at the edges of his consciousness. He had tried everything: meditation, isolation, even more radical experiments to contain the Hulk's fury, but nothing worked. Worse still, Bruce was certain that the gamma radiation was evolving, mutating in a way that he couldn't predict. He'd run the tests himself, watched the data spike in a way that defied logic. Something was amplifying the gamma energy inside him, accelerating the inevitable. Just then, his tablet beeped. A headline flashed on the screen: Spider-Man loses control, causes chaos in the city center. Bruce's stomach dropped. He scanned the article, his eyes narrowing as he read about Peter Parker, sudden and erratic behavior. Gamma radiation, Peter Parker. It couldn't be a coincidence. Bruce tapped the screen again, pulling up the details of the event. Spider-Man-side's powers were out of control, just like the Hulk. And if Peter was affected, there was a chance the same force was working on both of them. Without hesitating, Bruce packed his things and headed for the city. He didn't know what was happening, but he had to find Peter. If they were both in the same boat, maybe together, they could figure out a way to fix this mess before it was too late. Peter sat on the rooftop of a midtown building, knees drawn up to his chest, staring out over the city. His head still pounded from the effects of the gamma exposure, and every time he tried to use his spider powers, they acted like a wild animal fighting against its lead. His webs shot out uncontrollably, and his enhanced reflexes made him feel jittery, like he was on the verge of losing control of his entire body. He felt like a ticking time bomb. The sound of footsteps behind him caught his attention. Peter turned sharply, his spider sense tingling at the familiar presence there. Stepping out of the shadows was Bruce Banner. "Bruce?" Peter asked, surprise and relief mixing in his voice. Bruce nodded. "I saw the news, thought you might need some help. Looks like we've both got a gamma problem." Peter sighed and rubbed his temples. "I thought I had it under control, but now it feels like everything is falling apart. My powers, my body, I can't trust myself anymore." Bruce sat down beside him, staring at the skyline. "I know the feeling. I've been dealing with this for years, but lately it's gotten worse. The gamma radiation is doing something new, something we don't understand. And if it starts affecting you too, we've got a bigger problem than we thought." Peter frowned. "Do you think someone is behind this? I mean, gamma radiation doesn't just go haywire on its own, right?" Bruce nodded grimly. "I've had my suspicions for a while, but I couldn't prove anything until now. Whoever is soon doing this is targeting people like us, people with gamma in their blood." Peter's mind raced. If Bruce was right, that meant they were being watched, maybe even hunted. And if someone had the power to manipulate gamma radiation on this scale, they were dealing with more than just random accident. "So what do we do?" Peter asked, his voice steadying. "If someone's pulling the strings, we need to find them fast." Bruce gave him a look of determination. "We start by finding out who's behind this, and then we stop them before they destroy us." The next few days were a blur of research and reconnaissance. Peter and Bruce worked in tandem, pulling every string they could to trace the source of the gamma radiation anomaly. The deeper they dug, the more it became clear that someone had been experimenting with gamma energy for years, tweaking the formula, making it stronger and more dangerous. It wasn't too long before they uncovered a trail leading to an organization called the Gamma Syndicate, a secretive group with ties to advanced military technology and black market weapons. The Syndicate's goal was simple: harness the power of gamma radiation to create an army of super soldiers. And they'd been using Peter and Bruce as unwitting test subjects. Peter's spider sense flared as they discovered the Syndicate, a hidden lab on the outskirts of the city. It was a nondescript building surrounded by barbed wire and armed guards, but inside it held the key to everything the technology that had tampered with their bodies and minds. As they planned their infiltration, tensions between Peter and Bruce began to rise. Bruce's fear of losing control was palpable, and Peter's frustration with his own unstable abilities only made things worse. "We can just barge in there," Peter argued. "We need a plan, something that doesn't involve smashing everything to pieces." Bruce's jaw tightened. "We don't have time for careful. These people have been experimenting on us, and they all keep doing it. If we don't stop them now." Peter crossed his arms. "I get that, but we can afford to make things work. If we lose control in there, we could end up hurting a lot of innocent people." Bruce clenched his fists, struggling to keep the Hulk at bay. "You think I don't know that? Every day I live with the possibility that I might lose it, that I might hurt someone I care about. But we don't have the luxury of time, Peter. We need to act." Peter took a deep breath, sensing the desperation in Bruce's voice. He knew Bruce was right. They didn't have time for a perfect plan. The longer they waited, the stronger the Syndicate's hold on their powers would become. "Okay," Peter said quietly. "Let's do this, but we do it smart. No unnecessary risk." Bruce nodded. Though the tension between them remained together, they prepared to face the Gamma Syndicate, knowing that the fate of their lives and possibly the world hung in the balance. Peter and Bruce moved silently through the shadows, their eyes fixed on the Gamma Syndicate's heavily guarded lab. The facility loomed before them, an ominous presence surrounded by steel fences and security cameras. The night air was heavy with tension, and Peter's spider sense buzzed with a constant undercurrent of danger. Bruce adjusted the strap of the small backpack slung over his shoulder. Inside were a few carefully chosen pieces of tech detonators, jammers, and a small imp device Peter had rigged together on the fly. Their plan wasn't foolproof, but it was their best shot at stopping the Syndicate before the organization could weaponize the gamma radiation completely. Peter scanned the area, noting the guards' patrol patterns. "We take out the cameras first, then hit the power grid. That should disable the lab security systems long enough for us to get inside without setting off alarm." Bruce nodded, his jaw tight, his hands twitched involuntarily, betraying the simmering tension underneath. Peter knew how hard it was for Bruce to stay calm under the constant threat of the Hulk's emergence, but they didn't have the luxury of waiting for a better moment. Peter fired a web at the nearest camera, pulling it down with a quick yank. He darted forward, his movements silent and swift, disabling the next two cameras in rapid succession. Bruce followed behind, his eyes scanning for any signs of trouble. So far, everything was going according to plan. They reached the side of the building, crouching behind a stack of crates as a pair of guards passed by. Bruce watched them carefully, his fists clenched tight, while Peter worked on the power box attached to the wall. A few sparks flew as he rewired the system, his fingers moving with practiced precision. "Almost there," Peter whispered. "Just a few more seconds." Suddenly, Bruce's muscles tensed. His breath hitched as his eyes flickered green for a moment. Peter glanced over, concern flashing in his eyes. "Bruce, you good?" Bruce nodded, though his voice was strained. "I am. Fine, just keep going." Peter hesitated for a moment, then returned to his work. The power box clicked, and the lights around the lab flickered briefly before plunging the area into darkness. Peter grinned beneath his mask. "Got it. Let's move." They slipped inside the lab, their footsteps muffled by the sound of distant machinery. The place was a maze of sterile hallways, the walls lined with monitors displaying data streams and chemical reading. Faint hum of energy vibrated through the air, a constant reminder of the gamma radiation pulsing within the facility. Peter's spider sense tingled as they approached the central chamber. He reached out, grabbing Bruce's arm to stop him. "Wait," he whispered. "Something's wrong." Bruce narrowed his eyes. "What do you mean?" Peter's gaze flicked to the security panel on the wall. "They should vet had someone stationed here. This place is too quiet." Bruce tensed his shoulders, squaring. "Maybe they were expecting us." Peter saw his heart raced as they crept forward, their senses on high alert. As they approached the entrance to the main lab, the door slid open automatically, revealing a vast high-tech chamber filled with glowing green energy. At the center of the room stood a massive gamma reactor, its core humming with raw, untamed power. And in front of the reactor stood a figure Peter recognized immediately, a tall, gaunt man in a lab coat, his face twisted in a smug, self-satisfied grin. "Dr. Resner," Bruce growled, his voice low and dangerous. Dr. Resner turned to face them, his eyes gleaming with cold calculation. "Aunt Banner, Parker, I've been expecting you." Peter's fist clenched as his spider sense flared, warning him of the danger radiating from the reactor. "What the hell are you doing?" Resner chuckled, his hands clasped behind his back. "Isn't it obvious? I am perfecting the gamma process. You and Banner are merely the prototypes, the stepping stones to a new generation of enhanced soldiers. With the reactor at full power, I can control the transformation, harness the energy, and create an army unlike anything the world has ever seen." Bruce's eyes flashed with anger. "You replaying with forces. You don't try understand Resnor. You can't control gamma radiation and it'll destroy everything." Resnor smirked. "I disagree. I've spent years perfecting the formula, refining the process. And now with you two here, I have all the data I need to complete my work. Soon the Hulk will be nothing more than a relic of the past, and Spider-Man, well, let's just say your days of heroism are over." Peter stepped forward, his voice cold. "You're not going to get away with this. We'll stop you." Razor's grin widened as he gestured to the reactor behind him. "I'd like to see you try." Suddenly, the floor beneath them rumbled, and the walls shook as the reactor surged with energy. The lights flickered violently, and the air crackled with raw gamma power. Peter's spider sense exploded in warning as the reactor began to overload, its core pulsing dangerously. Bruce grunted, his body trembling as the gamma energy in the room began to affect him. His muscles bulged, and his skin flushed green. "I can hold it." Peter's heart pounded in his chest. If Bruce lost control now, there'd be no stopping the Hulk from tearing the entire facility apart. He had to think fast. There had to be a way to shut down the reactor before it was too late. His eyes darted around the room, searching for anything that could help. Then he spotted it, a control panel near the reactor, its base flashing red with warning lights. If he could just get to it. "I'll distract Resner," Peter said, his voice urgent. "Do you focus on keeping the Hulk under control?" Bruce nodded through gritted teeth, his body trembling as the gamma energy continued to surge around him. Peter shot a web at Resnor's feet, yanking him off balance and sending him sprawling to the floor. Resnor snarled, his composure breaking. "You're too late, Parker. The process has already begun. There's no stopping it now." Peter ignored him, launching himself toward the control panel in a blur of movement. His spider sense screamed in his head, warning him of the imminent danger as he reached the panel and frantically began inputting command. The reactor's core pulsed violently, and Peter's fingers flew over the controls, searching for the shutdown sequence. Behind him, Bruce let out a guttural roar as the Hulk began to emerge, his body contorting and growing as the transformation took hold. Peter could hear the strain in Bruce's voice as he fought to maintain control, the raw power of the Hulk surging just beneath the surface. Come on, Peter muttered under his breath, his heart racing as the reactor sent alarms, blared louder. The core was seconds away from a catastrophic meltdown. Finally, with a final keystroke, the reactor systems responded. The hum of energy died down, and the core sighed violent, pulsing slowed to a stop. Peter let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. But as the reactor powered down, Resnor lunged at Peter, his face twisted with fury. "You think you've won. I'll tear you apart." Before Reginor could reach him, Bruce, still struggling to keep the Hulk at bay, grabbed the scientist and flung him across the room with one hand. Reznor crashed into the far wall, unconscious as Bruce's breathing slowed, his body slowly returning to normal. Peter collapsed against the control panel, his chest heaving with exhaustion. That was way too close. Bruce nodded, his eyes still flickering with traces of green. We stopped the reactor, but this isn't T over the Syndicate. 1T stopped coming after us. Peter looked around the lab, his mind already racing with possibility. They had won the battle, but the war was far from over. The Gamma Syndicate was bigger than Reznor, and as long as the organization existed, people like Peter and Bruce would always be target. "We'll take them down," Peter said, his voice resolute, "but we'll do it together." Bruce gave him a small, grim smile together. As they left the facility, the weight of what they had accomplished and what still lay ahead pressed heavily on their shoulder. The world was a dangerous place for men like them, but for now, they had each other, and that was enough. Welcome to the story. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and support me. The air over New York City felt heavier than usual. A damp fog clung to the early autumn morning, but it wasn't just the weather that seemed oppressive. People moved along the streets with tense expressions, their shoulders hunched, conversations muted, and hurried footsteps echoing off the tall building. Normally, the city thrived on the hustle and bustle of its chaotic energy, but today there was an unspoken agitation in the air, as if something was about to snap. Peter Parker felt it too, swinging across the city, his spider sense tingled at the edges of his perception, not a full-on alarm, but a soft buzz, warning him that something was off. Below him, minor skirmishes had broken out in the streets, drivers honking and cursing louder than usual, pedestrians shoving each other over minor misunderstanding. It was as if everyone was on edge, ready to explode at the slightest provocation. Landing on a rooftop overlooking Times Square, Spider-Man crouched and surveyed the scene. His mask hid his frown, but inside Peter's mind raced. What's going on today? He muttered to himself, scanning the streets below. The usual energy of the city felt darker, more hostile. Even the tourists seemed anxious, their usual excitement muted as they kept their distance from the simmering arguments breaking out among locals. Suddenly, a sharp scream pierced the air, followed by a loud crash. "Spider-Man," said, snapped in the direction of the noise. Near the intersection, a delivery truck had plowed into a taxi. The truck driver, red-faced and wild-eyed, had leaped out of his cab and was pounding his fists on the hood of the taxi, screaming incoherently. The taxi driver, no less enraged, was climbing out of his car, brandishing a tire iron, ready to meet the man. "Scifiaudiobooks." "Great, just great," Spider-Man muttered, shooting a web to swing down to the street. "This is getting out of hand." He landed gracefully between the two men just as the taxi driver was about to swing the tire iron. With a quick flick of his wrist, Spider-Man webbed the man, sticking the weapon to the ground. "Whoa there, fellas," he said, holding up his hands. "Let's not turn this into a WrestleMania audition. Can we talk this out?" The truck driver, his eyes wide and bloodshot, lunged at Spider-Man with a guttural roar. Peter barely had time to dodge, flipping back onto a street light. "Okay, so talking isn't an option today," he said, leaping down and webbing the man his feet to the sidewalk. "What is with people today?" The crowd that had gathered wasn't helping. People were shouting at the drivers, egging them on, their own anger bubbling over. It felt like the entire city was teetering on the edge of a full-blown riot. That's when the roar shook the air. Spider-Man froze, his senses going haywire as the ground beneath him rumbled. Across the street, pedestrians screamed and scattered as the source of the roar came into view. A massive green-skinned figure barreled down the avenue, smashing through cars and streetlights with terrifying ease. The Hulk. Spider-Man's stomach dropped. Oh no. Hulk was in one of his uncontrollable rages, and worse, it wasn't to the usual level of anger. His eyes burned with fury beyond anything Spider-Man had seen before. The Jade Giant swatted aside cars like toys, his mouth pulled into a grimace of pure hatred as he stomped through the street, causing utter devastation. Spider-Man sprang into action, swinging over the chaos and landing on a nearby fire escape. "Hulk, hey, big guy, calm down." But the Hulk wasn't tired listening. With a snarl, he picked up a parked SUV and hurled it at a nearby building, shattering windows and sending debris raining down on the street below. "Okay, this is bad. This is really bad," Peter said, under his breath. He detangled with Hulk before, But this felt different. Hulk's anger was usually powerful, yes, but not like this. This was feral, destructive, as if something had pushed him beyond his usual limit. Spider-Man didn't he have time to wonder what had triggered this? He had to act fast. Before more people got hurt, using his web shooters, he launched a series of webs, trying to tie down Hulk's arms to slow him down, maybe get his attention. But the Hulk barely registered the webs as he tore through them, his rage only intensifying. Spider-Man flipped and swung, dodging debris and trying to find a way to contain the behemoth. "Okay, Hulk, let's not make this personal," he quipped, even though he knew humor was not a combo situation. His mind raced for a plan. Webbing wasn't gonna cut it. He needed something to snap Hulk out of it. But then he noticed something: canisters, small and metallic, scattered among the wreckage. They were almost hidden in the chaos. But Spider-Man's sharp eyes caught the faint mist leaking from one of them. He swung over and crouched next to one, examining it closely. His spider sense buzzed stronger the closer he got to the canister. Whatever this was, it wasn't very good. He picked up the canister, carefully studying it. It looked like something out of a science lab. Definitely not something you do find lying around on the streets of New York. A quick glance told him this wasn't just some random chemical spill. This was intentional. As Hulk continued his rampage in the background, Spider-Man's mind clicked into detective mode. Someone had released these canisters. Someone had planned it. And Hulk had been the intended target. Peter saw a heart raced. If someone had engineered this chaos, if they had wanted Hulk to lose control, then this wasn't just about destruction. It was about sending a message, or worse, causing even greater harm. He couldn't let that happen. But first, he had to stop the Hulk. Webbing the canister to his belt, Spider-Man launched himself into the air, swinging high above the devastation. Hulk was still raging below, throwing a city bus across the street, as if it weighed nothing. Spider-Man knew he couldn't take the Hulk head-on, but maybe, just maybe, he could outsmart him. He landed on a rooftop, quickly scanning the area. A construction site was nearby with steel beams and heavy equipment. Spider-Man's mind raced. He could lure Hulk toward the site, use the machinery and the structure to trap him, at least temporarily, until he could figure out what was in those canisters and how to stop it. With a deep breath, Spider-Man shot a web at a nearby crane and swung down, landing just in front of Hulk. "Hey, green guy, I know you're mad, but how about we take a breather?" Hulk roared, swinging a massive fist at Spider-Man. Peter dodged easily, flipping through the air and landing a few feet away. "Come on, Hulk, follow me," he shouted, sprinting toward the construction site. Hulk, blinded by rage, charged after him, smashing everything in his path. Spider-Man leaped and swung, leading Hulk deeper into the site where the steel framework of a building under construction loomed ahead. Just a little further, Peter muttered to himself, webbing a beam to swing himself higher. Hulk followed, plowing through the scaffolding like it was made of paper. Spider-Man needed to time this perfectly. With Hulk directly beneath him, Spider-Man shot a web at one of the steel beams, yanking it loose. The beam crashed down in front of Hulk, momentarily halting his charge. Spider-Man quickly webbed more beams together, creating a makeshift cage around the behemoth. It wasn't too much, but it might hold him for a few minutes, long enough for Spider-Man to figure out his next move. Spider-Man perched on the last intact beam, watching the makeshift cage creak under the Hulk's relentless pounding. It wouldn't hold for long. He could already see the steel framework buckling. He had minutes, maybe seconds, to figure out his next move. Glancing down at the canister still webbed to his belt, Peter realized it might hold the key to everything. Whatever gas was inside it had to be what set the Hulk off, but how to reverse it? His mind raced. He could bring the canister to someone who might understand its chemistry. Reed Richards, Tony Stark, but he didn't have time for that. Right now, Hulk was going to tear the city apart if Spider-Man didn't find a way to calm him down. There had to be a way to counteract this gas. Peter's eyes darted around the construction site. The air was still thick with dust from the destruction, and more civilians were starting to gather near the chaos. Some of them were filming with their phones, unaware of how dangerous the situation really was. Suddenly, his thoughts snapped into place. Air filtration. The gas was clearly airborne. What if he could neutralize it by purging the air around the Hulk? Maybe the construction site had industrial fans or equipment that could help. He shot a web line to the nearest building and swung over to what looked like a portable air filtration unit. It was bulky and covered in grime, but it might just do the trick. With a swift yank, Spider-Man broke open the side panel and started to rewire the machine. Come on, he muttered under his breath. His hands moved quickly, webbing some wires together to bypass the power limitation. The sound of Hulk's furious roars grew louder as Spider-Man worked. The framework was giving way. Almost there, Peter pulled the last wire, and the machine hummed to life, vibrating with a low, steady hum. Spider-Man quickly adjusted the filtration settings, boosting the air intake and adjusting the dispersal output. If this worked, it could suck in the contaminated air around Hulk and filter it before sending it back out. It wasn't perfect, but it might buy them time. He aimed the intake toward the raging green giant, just as Hulk smashed through the last of the beam. Here goes nothing. Spider-Man flipped the switch. The machine roared to life, sucking in the surrounding air with a powerful whoosh. Spider-Man watched as the invisible mist around Hulk started to dissipate, drawn into the filtration unit. For a moment, Hulk paused, his chest heaving, and Spider-Man could see some of the wildness in his eyes fading. But it wasn't high enough. Hulk was still furious, still dangerous. The gas might be filtered out, but the damage was done. Hulk was beyond the point of reason. Spider-Man knew he couldn't hold him off much longer. Alone, desperation gnawed at him as he considered his option. He couldn't fight Hulk directly, not without risking even more destruction. But maybe he could still reason with Bruce Banner, the man inside the monster. Bruce Spider-Man shouted, swinging down just out of Hulk's house reach. Listen to me, I know you were in there. Instead of fight this, Hulk roared in response, but it wasn't true the same mindless bellow as before. There was a flicker of recognition in his eyes, a moment of hesitation. Come on, Bruce, you're stronger than this. You don't see you want to hurt anyone? Spider-Man kept talking, dodging debris and webbing up anything Hulk tried to throw. He had to keep him focused, keep him from losing control completely. Whatever they did to you, it's not you don't. You let them win. For a second, it looked like it might work. Hulk's massive fists lowered, his breathing slowing. But just as Peter thought he might be getting through to him, a high-pitched whine filled the air. Spider-Man's spider sense flared, and he leaped back just in time to avoid a barrage of small drones swooping down from above. What now? He groaned, flipping through the air and shooting webs at the drone. They weren't just ordinary surveillance bots. Each one was equipped with a small canister-like attachment, spraying more of the same anger-inducing gas as they flew in tight formation around the area. Whoever was behind this had more up their sleeve. Spider-Man shot a web to a nearby ledge and swung out of the gas and passed. The drones scattered, trying to blanket the area, but Peter's quick reflexes let him stay ahead of the cloud. He knew he couldn't keep dodging forever, though. The longer this went on, the harder it would be to control the situation. He needed to stop the drones, and fast. With a burst of energy, Spider-Man leaped high into the air, flipping over one of the drones and yanking it down with his web. He quickly examined it, his sharp eyes picking out a serial number on the side. It was some kind of military-grade tech, not something you'd find in a local electronics store. Whoever was behind this had serious resources. Great, just what I needed, he muttered, slinging the drone into a nearby wall, shattering it. But for everyone he destroyed, more seemed to appear, filling the air with that sinister mist. As Spider-Man fought to bring down the drones, a figure emerged from the shadows of a nearby building. Tall and draped in a long dark coat, the figure moved with the calm confidence of someone who had everything under control. The villain responsible for all this? Spider-Man's eyes narrowed beneath his mask. "You've got to be kidding me," he said under his breath. The figure raised a hand, and the remaining drones seemed to respond instantly, falling back and circling the villain like obedient pets. Spider-Man swung down, landing a few feet away, ready for a confrontation. "You must be the genius behind this mess," Spider-Man said, his tone sharp. "I don't suppose you'd be willing to explain why you thought turning New York into a battlefield was a good idea." The villain's voice was low, almost pleasant, as if discussing a minor inconvenience. "You were more perceptive than I gave you credit for, Spider-Man. But it's not New York, I care about it. Sit in." The figure gestured toward the Hulk, who was still thrashing in the distance, though with slightly less intensity than before. Spider-Man tensed. "You retargeting Hulk. A weapon? One that's far too dangerous to be left unchecked, and now I've proven it. With the right push, the Hulk can become the very thing people fear, an uncontrollable monster." Peter clenched his fists, his voice low and dangerous. "So you did all of this just to prove a point?" "Oh, it's more than that," the villain said, stepping closer. "This was just the beginning. Imagine what I could do with this gas on a larger scale. Not just the Hulk, imagine entire armies driven to madness, cities tearing themselves apart, chaos, Spider-Man, pure, unadulterated chaos. Spider-Man's blood ran cold, not on my watch. In a flash, he shot a web at the villain, aiming to disarm him. But the villain moved faster than Spider-Man anticipated, dodging to the side and sending a blast of energy from a device hidden in his coat. The blast knocked Spider-Man off balance, sending him sprawling across the ground. "You can stop this, Spider-Man," the villain said, his voice calm and confident. "I've already won. The city is already on the brink of collapse." Spider-Man pushed himself up, his body aching from the blast. He glanced toward the Hulk, who was still struggling against his own rage. The villain was right. If this dingy and soon New York could fall into complete chaos. But Spider-Man wasn't ready to give up. With a quick flick of his wrist, Peter shot a webline at one of the nearby drones and yanked it toward the villain. The drone's side canister exploded in a cloud of gas, enveloping the villain in the mist. For the first time, the villain's stealth, calm demeanor faltered, his eyes widening as he inhaled the very gas he had unleashed. The villain stumbled back, coughing, his face contorting with anger. "What have you done?" he snarled, his voice growing more unhinged by the second. Spider-Man didn't waste time. With the villain momentarily distracted, he webbed him up, pinning him to the ground. "I am stopping you," Peter said, his voice steady for good. As the villain struggled in the webs, his rage boiling over, Spider-Man turned his attention back to the Hulk. The filtration system had done its job. The gas around the area was finally clearing. Hulk's movements were slower now, less frenzied. Spider-Man approached cautiously, ready to leap away if needed. "Bruce," he said softly, "it's over. You are safe now." For a moment, Hulk's massive shoulders slumped, and Spider-Man saw Bruce Banner, eyes flicker through the monster, size rate. The green giant took a deep, shuddering breath, and slowly, agonizingly, began to shrink back down to human form. As Bruce Banner collapsed to the ground, Spider-Man rushed to his side. "Bruce? Okay." Banner nodded weakly, his voice barely audible. "It wasn't on me, Peter. I couldn't control it." "I know," Spider-Man said, his tone gentle. "It wasn't your fault." Together, they looked toward the villain, still writhing in the webs, consumed by his own anger. Spider-Man stood up, his voice firm as he contacted the authorities. "Tell them to bring a lot of backup and maybe some anger management counselor." As the police arrived to take the villain into custody, Peter couldn't help but feel a weight lift off his shoulder. New York had been saved for now, but he knew this wouldn't be the last time he do face chaos in the city. These being Spider-Man meant always standing between order and madness, no matter the cost. Welcome to the story. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and support me. The world had always marveled at the stars, but now, as the celestial event unfolded, a deep sense of dread filled the night sky. Across the globe, astronomers and scientists gathered in, all eyes glued to monitors that tracked the convergence of cosmic forces. It was unlike anything seen before, a rare alignment of galaxies, pulling their gravitational fields into one magnificent, terrifying event. But beneath the beauty lay an imminent danger, one that would shake the foundations of everything humanity thought they understood about the universe. In a dimly lit lab nestled in the heart of New York City, Bruce Banner sat watching the readings on his computer screen. His brow furrowed, fingers tapping rapidly across the keyboard. The gamma radiation readings had spiked beyond what he had anticipated. He had known the gamma burst was coming. Scientists had been tracking it for months, but he hadn't expected this. The gamma signature was stronger than anything he'd ever encountered. It had the potential to change everything, and not for the better. He stood abruptly, pacing back and forth, trying to keep his nerves in check. "This isn't just a burst. There's something else here, something more." The door to the lab creaked open, and Peter Parker, mask in hand, walked in with a familiar swagger, his youthful grin evident, despite the tension in the air. "Hey, Doc, what's got you all worked up this time? You find another crazy Hulkbuster weapon hidden in the gamma burst." Bruce glanced at him, his face solemn. "It's not a weapon, Peter. It's worth." Peter's grin faded, and he moved closer, scanning the screen. He didn't need to be a scientist to see something was wrong, but it's a lot of gamma, even for you, right? "Even for me," Bruce confirmed, his voice barely a whisper. Before either of them could say more, the ground rumbled beneath their feet. The lab shook, monitors rattling, as Bruce steadied himself against the table. Peter instinctively crouched, his enhanced senses alert. Through the large windows of the lab, the skyline of New York City was alive with sudden chaos. Bright streaks of light, like cracks in the sky, spread outward, and from those cracks, a horrifying sight emerged. Creatures unlike anything either man had ever seen poured out, their bodies shimmering with gamma energy, their forms twisted and grotesque. "What the hell is that?" Peter whispered, his voice laced with shock. Bruce didn't respond immediately. His eyes were locked on the creatures, his mind racing through possibilities, explanations, none of which made sense. The rift the gamma burst wasn't. There's just a release of energy. It's on the doorway. Peter stood beside him, now pulling his mask back over his face, his voice firm, a doorway to where. Bruce turned to him, his face pale. Another dimension. Before Peter could process the full weight of Bruce's words, the lab's alarms blared, a harsh red light bathing the room. A communication link flashed on the screen shield, the logo filling the monitor. "Banner Parker, you were seeing this, right?" Nick Fury, his gruff voice cut through the alarm, his expression as grim as ever. "We've got these things coming out of the sky all over the world. We need you both on this now." Bruce stepped forward, his mind snapping into action. "We need to get inside that rift. These creatures, whatever they are, they were not just coming here by accident. They're being drawn through. If we don't close that rift, they'll keep coming." "Yeah, well, we've got about 2 minutes before New York becomes a feeding ground. You and Parker get to the rift and shut it down. We've got extraction teams on the way for civilians, but we can try hold off these creatures for long," Fury replied, the urgency unmistakable. Peter clenched his fists, ready for action. "So what's on the plan, Doc, you smash? I web, and we call it a day." Bruce hesitated, then nodded. "Pretty much, but it's not going to be that simple." With Tony Stark, advanced tech strapped to their suits, Bruce and Peter arrived at the epicenter of the chaos. The rift hovered over the city, like an open wound in the sky, pulsating with a sickly green light. Creatures, some as large as trucks, others no bigger than dogs, crawled out of the crack in reality, their bodies thrumming with gamma energy, their eyes glowing with an unnatural light. The streets were in disarray. Cars were overturned, buildings partially collapsed, and terrified civilians ran in all directions, screaming for help. SHIELD agents were already on the scene, trying to hold the line, but it was clear they were outmatched. The gamma creatures were relentless, their thick hides shrugging off bullets like rain. Peter swung into action, his webs latching onto the side of a crumbling skyscraper as he yanked a gamma beast off its feet, binding it in a web cocoon before kicking it away. "Hey, these things aren't so tough," he shouted, leaping onto another. Bruce on the ground was far more restrained. The Hulk was fighting to get out. Bruce could feel it, but he knew he needed to stay in control. The rift was warping everything around it, including him. If he let the Hulk out, there was no telling how much damage he could do in this already unstable situation. He took a deep breath, trying to steady his nerves. "We need to get closer to the rift." Bruce called out to Peter, who was in the midst of webbing up 2 more creatures. "The only way to shut this down is from the other side." Peter leapt down beside him, wiping some dirt from his suit. "Other side, you were telling me we have to go in there." Bruce nodded. "It's on the only way. We need to find the source of the gamma energy. If we can destroy it, the rift should close." Peter hesitated for a moment, looking up at the rift. It was terrifying, an endless void of swirling green energy teeming with creatures from another dimension. But if Bruce was right and they didn't shut it down, the world would be overrun in hours. "All right, let's do it," Peter said, his voice firm. "But if I see one giant gamma spider in there, I am out." Bruce couldn't help but smirk. They moved quickly, dodging through the chaos as they made their way toward the rift. As they approached, the energy from the rift grew more intense, the air around them crackling with gamma radiation. Bruce could feel it in his bones, the Hulk stirring within him, eager to fight. But he couldn't let that happen. Not yet. When they reached the base of the rift, Bruce activated the device Tony had provided, a handheld scanner designed to stabilize their passage through the dimensional barrier. He glanced at Peter, who gave him a quick thumbs up before Bruce triggered the device. The air around them shimmered, and suddenly they were no longer in New York. The rift had taken them to a place that defied description. The sky was an eerie, unnatural shade of green, and the ground beneath their feet seemed to shift with every step, as though reality itself was unstable. Towering above them were colossal, twisted structures. Some looked like mountains, others like grotesque living organisms. In the distance, the Gamma Nexus pulsed, a beacon of energy at the heart of this strange world. The creatures here were far more numerous and far more powerful than the ones that had crossed into Earth. Some flew overhead, their wings made of pure energy, while others crawled along the ground, leaving trails of toxic sludge in their wake. Peter stared in awe. This is insane. Bruce could barely keep his focus. The gamma energy here was overwhelming, pressing down on him like a vice. His skin tingled with the sensation, his muscles twitching involuntarily. He knew he couldn't hold back much longer. "Come on," Bruce said, his voice strained. "We need to find the Nexus." As they pushed forward, the ground beneath them began to tremble, and the creatures around them stirred. Something was coming, something big. Before they could react, a massive shadow fell over them. They looked up, and there it was, a gamma beast unlike any they had seen before, towering over them like a living mountain, its body pulsating with pure gamma energy. Its eyes locked onto them, and with the deafening roar it charged. Peter moved first, his spider sense flaring as he leapt into the air, shooting webs at the creature, Sci's face in an attempt to blind it. "I've got its attention. You do your science thing, Doc." I can." Bruce gasped, falling to his knees. His skin began to turn green, muscles bulging as the Hulk began to take over. Peter still dodging the gamma beasts. As the Tex glanced over in panic. "Bruce, you've got to stay with me, man." Bruce gritted his teeth, fighting back the transformation with everything he had. "Peter, get to the Nexus. I'll handle this." And with a roar of his own, Bruce let go. Bruce's body expanded rapidly, muscles tearing through his clothes as the Hulk surged forth. His roar echoed through the warped landscape of the rift, sending a tremor through the ground. Peter didn't even flinch. He had seen Bruce in action before, but this time something felt different. The gamma energy from the rift had amplified the Hulk in ways that Peter could sense even from a distance. The Hulk wasn't just stronger, he was more dangerous, more primal. The gamma beast locked eyes with the newly transformed Hulk, sensing the challenge. It roared again, its massive claws slashing at the ground as it prepared to charge. But the Hulk, now fully unleashed, slammed his fists into the earth, shaking the very ground they stood on, and met the beast head-on. Peter's focus, however, wasn't tied on the fight. He knew Bruce could handle the creature, at least for now. His priority was getting to the Gamma Nexus, the source of the rift, and the only thing that could stop the invasion. He swung his way through the chaotic battlefield, dodging smaller creatures that leaped from the ground, their claws scraping the air just behind him. The Nexus glowed in the distance, an enormous pulsating sphere of pure gamma energy. It was unlike anything Peter had ever seen, its surface swirling with a mix of green and violet hues, the very fabric of this dimension tethered to its core. It was as if the entire rift revolved around this one point, feeding on its energy. As Peter approached the Nexus, he felt the overwhelming pull of its power. His suit's sensors were going haywire, flashing warnings about the high levels of gamma radiation, but there was no turning back. Tony's tech had given him some protection, but it wouldn't last long. He had to act fast. Peter landed on the platform just in front of the Nexus, his mind racing. He needed a way to disrupt the energy flow, something to destabilize it enough to cause a collapse without vaporizing himself in the process. His fingers flew across his wrist console, accessing the tech Tony had left him. But the solution wasn't here. He was no gamma expert, and this situation was beyond even his understanding of science. Think, Peter, think, he muttered under his breath. His mind was a whirlwind of ideas, none of them feeling right. He wasn't a scientist on the same level as Bruce or Tony. He was just a kid from Queens, a friendly neighborhood Spider-Man. But then it hit him. He didn't need to destroy the Nexus, he just needed to overload it. Disrupt a balance of galaxy enough to force it to collapse on itself. It wasn't elegant, but it was the only shot he had. He dug through his belt, pulling out a series of web grenades. They were designed for containment, but if he adjusted the settings, he quickly tinkered with the devices, recalibrating the energy signature. He had no idea if this would work, but there wasn't time for second guessing. He placed the grenades around the base of the Nexus, sticking them to the platform with his web. As he did, the ground beneath him began to shake violently, a low rumble that signaled the impending collapse of the rift. Peter activated the detonators and the web grenades began to hum with energy, pulsing in sync with the Nexus. The sphere of gamma energy flared brighter, its surface rippling as the grenade started to destabilize the field. Peter took a step back, watching as the Nexus began to wobble, its energy spiraling out of control. But just as he prepared to move away, a massive shadow loomed over him. The Gamma Beast had turned its attention away from the Hulk and was now charging straight for Peter, its eyes glowing with fury. Peter's heart raced as he realized he wouldn't be able to outrun it. Before the creature could reach him, the Hulk slammed into its side with the force of a freight train, sending it crashing into the ground. The two titans locked in a brutal struggle, each one trying to overpower the other. The Hulk was relentless, his fists pounding into the creature's hide with earth, shattering blows. But the Gamma Beast was no ordinary foe. It fought back with equal ferocity, its claws slashing through the air, ripping chunks out of the landscape as it struggled to gain the upper hand. Peter seized the opportunity and swung away from the Nexus just as the web grenades hit critical mass. The sphere of energy collapsed in on itself with a deafening roar, the very fabric of the rift trembling as the Nexus imploded. The energy release sent shockwaves through the dimension, tearing at its foundation. The Gamma Beast let out a screech of pain as the Nexus collapse drained it of its power. Its once mighty form began to wither, its glowing eyes dimming as the rift itself began to fold in on itself. The Hulk, sensing the creature's weakening state, delivered one final devastating punch, sending the Gamma Beast crashing to the ground, its body disintegrating into nothingness. Peter landed beside Bruce, who was slowly reverting back to his human form. The gamma energy in the air was dissipating, and with it, the overwhelming rage that had fueled the Hulk. Bruce was breathing heavily, his body covered in sweat and dirt, but he managed a weak smile. "Nice job, kid," Bruce said, his voice hoarse but filled with relief. Peter looked around as the landscape began to crumble, the rift collapsing in on itself. "We need to get out of here now." Bruce nodded, struggling to his feet. They had little time before the rift closed completely, trapping them inside this decaying dimension. Peter fired a webline and grabbed Bruce, swinging them both toward the fading portal in the sky. The ground beneath them cracked and splintered as the dimension continued to unravel. The once chaotic landscape now, nothing more than a blur of green light and dust. They made it just in time. The two of them shot through the portal, landing back in the streets of New York, just as the rift sealed behind them with a final thunderous boom. The air was still, and for the first time since the chaos began, there was silence. Peter lay on the ground for a moment, catching his breath. "Well, that was intense," he muttered, his voice muffled by his mask. Bruce, still recovering from the transformation, sat up slowly, glancing around. The streets were a mess, buildings damaged, cars overturned, and remnants of the gamma creatures littering the ground. But it was over, the rift was closed, and the invasion had been stopped. SHIELD agents moved in quickly, securing the area and attending to the civilian. Nick Fury approached, his usual scowl replaced by a rare expression of relief. "You two did good, Fury," said his tone gruff but appreciative. "The world's still here, thanks to you." Bruce gave a tired nod, still feeling the effects of the battle. "We got lucky if that rift had stayed open any longer." Fury waved him off. "No time for what-ifs. Banner, you got the job done. That's all that mattered." Peter stood, stretching his sore muscles. "So what now? Do we just pretend like nothing happened and go back to our regular life?" Fury raised an eyebrow. "When have any of you ever had regular lives?" Peter smirked beneath his mask. "Fair point." As the cleanup continued, Bruce and Peter stood side by side, watching the aftermath of the battle. They had been through a lot together, and despite the dangers, they had succeeded. But Bruce knew better than anyone that this was just one battle in an endless war. The universe was vast and filled with threats far beyond Earth, sent understanding. "We'll be ready for the next one," Peter said quietly, as if reading Bruce's mind. Bruce glanced at him, a hint of a smile tugging at his lips. "Yeah, we will." With that, they turned and walked away from the scene, knowing that while today had been dealt with, the future held many more challenges, some of which might even make a gamma rift seem like child's play. Welcome to the story. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and support me. New York City's early morning fog was lifting as Peter Parker swung across the skyline, his web slinging, reflecting the rhythm of his thought. The chill in the air, which had previously signaled the arrival of autumn, now carried an unnatural charge, an energy that felt more like tension than change in the weather. Something was happening beneath the surface of this city, something big. "We're reports of strange energy surges had caught Peter's attention over the past few days, and the more he dug into the incidents, the more concerned he became. The surges weren't just random, they were precise, almost surgical. Whatever the source, it wasn't nature, and it wasn't accidental. His destination loomed in the distance, the sharp edges of Stark Tower rising above the city like a beacon. Tony Stark had been unreachable for days off-planet on some urgent mission, leaving Peter to figure things out on his own. Not that he minded, but without the Iron Man to genius or resources, Peter was left relying on his instincts, and his instincts told him something wasn't tie. A flash of light caught his attention, pulling him from his thought. Below him, near the harbor, a small warehouse emitted a pulsing blue glow. It was subtle, but unmistakable, the source of the energy surges. Peter shot a web to the nearest building and swung down, landing softly on the rooftop of the warehouse. His spider sense tingled faintly enough to tell him that he wasn't alone, but not enough to scream danger. With a quick check of his surroundings, Peter slipped through a skylight and dropped quietly into the shadows of the warehouse. The interior was packed with equipment far beyond what one would expect in a typical storage facility. Advanced machinery, computer terminals, and glowing, humming generators filled the space. And standing at the center of it all was a tall man in a long white lab coat, his back turned to Peter as he adjusted some kind of control panel. Dr. Elias Marx, the man at the heart of the mystery. His name had come up in Peter's some research, a brilliant scientist with a reputation for pushing the boundaries of ethical science. Marcus had been out of the spotlight for years, working on who knew what now. It seemed Peter had found the answer. Carefully, Peter inched closer, staying in the shadows, as he observed Marcus at work. The man moved with a precision that suggested years of experience, his hands deftly manipulating the controls in front of him. Whatever he was doing, it was no amateur experiment. Before Peter could get any closer, a voice cut through the silence. "You can come out, Spider-Man. I know you're there." Peter froze, his mind racing. He hadn't made a sound, or at least he didn't. How had Marx known he was there? "I sensed you the moment you entered the building." However, Marx continued, his voice calm, almost pleasant. "Your energy signature is unique, after all." With no point in hiding, Peter stepped out of the shadows and faced the scientist's Tourist energy signature. That is a new one. Marx turned to face him, a small smile on his lips. "So I've been studying gamma radiation and other forms of energy for years, Spider-Man. Your particular enhancements give off a distinct signal, one that I've become quite familiar with. But I'm guessing you didn't come here to hear about that? You want to know about my project?" Peter kept his posture relaxed, but his mind was alert, ready for anything. "Projects, you mean the energy surges you've been causing all over the city? Yeah, I am kind of curious about that." Marx's smile widened, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Here, I know what I'm doing here is beyond the comprehension of most people, even someone as gifted as yourself. But I'll explain, since you were already here. I've developed a machine, one that can control gamma energy in ways no one thought possible. And with it, I've perfected a method to help your friend Bruce Banner." The mention of Thanos and they made Peter's chest tighten. What does this have to do with Banner?" Mark stepped closer, his eyes gleaming with a mix of excitement and arrogance. "Bruce Banner has been tormented by the Hulk for years, unable to control the transformation fully. My invention can change that. With my technology, Banner can control his transformations perfectly. He can stay in his human form, or become the Hulk whenever he chooses. No more accidents, no more danger to those around him." Peter's skepticism flared. "You were saying you can control the Hulk? That's a pretty big claim, Tech." "I'm not claiming anything, Spider-Man. I am offering a solution." Peter crossed his arms, feeling the weight of the situation settling on his shoulders. Banner had struggled with the Hulk for as long as Peter had known him, and the idea of a cure, or at least a way to control the monster within him, was tempting. But something about Marcus O'Alfer felt off. The man was too confident, too sure of himself. Peter had seen that kind of certainty before, and it rarely led to anything good. "Was that the catch?" Peter asked, narrowing his eyes. There's always a catch with stuff like this." Marx's expression did change, but there was a flicker of something in his eyes, something darker. "The catch, if you want to call it that, is that Bruce Banner would have to make a choice. If he uses my machine, he will remain in his Hulk form permanently. No more Banner, just the Hulk, but with full control of his mind and action. Peter's heart skipped a beat. Banner stuck as the Hulk forever. That didn't sound like a solution. It sounded like a prison. That's not a choice, Peter said, his voice tightening. Tried that seg trap. Marx raised an eyebrow. A trap? Hardly. It's a solution to a problem that has plagued him for years. Wouldn't you want to be free of the monster inside you if you had the chance? Peter shook his head. Banner's not just the Hulk. He's a brilliant scientist, a good man. You were asking him to give up everything that makes him who he is, and in return, he gains freedom? Marx countered. True freedom, not just from the Hulk, but from the fear of losing control. Isn't that worth the sacrifice? Peter stared at Marx, his mind racing. There was something more to this. Something Marx wasn't saying. Why are you doing this? What's else in it for you? Marx's smile faltered for a moment, then returned, colder than before. I am a scientist, Spider-Man. I seek progress, innovation. What I am doing here could revolutionize the world, could unlock the potential of gamma energy for all of humanity. But to do that, I need someone like Bruce Banner, someone who can handle the power of the Hulk. Peter Spider's sense tingled again, stronger this time. Marx wasn't just interested in helping Banner. He wanted to use him to harness the Hulk's power for his own purposes. Whatever Marx was planning, it wasn't too good. I am not letting you turn Banner into your personal science experiment, Peter said, his voice firm. Marx's eyes flashed with anger. Banner is already on his way here. He contacted me days ago. He wants this. Peter's stomach dropped. If Banner was walking into this willingly, it was going to be harder to stop him than he thought. I won. To let you do this? Peter repeated, his clenching. Mark's smile vanished, replaced by a cold, calculating look. We'll see about that. Before Peter could react, Marx pressed a button on his control panel, and the machinery in the warehouse roared to life. The humming generators kicked into overdrive, and the room was flooded with a bright, pulsing light. Peter's spider sense exploded into overdrive as he leaped into action, firing webs at the nearest control panel. But before he could disable it, the air around him crackled with energy, and he was thrown backward, crashing into a stack of crates. Too late, Spider-Man got over the noise. The process has already begun. Peter struggled to his feet, his body aching from the impact. He had to stop this before it was too late, but how Marx had set everything in motion, and Banner was walking right into the trap. In the distance, Peter heard the unmistakable sound of heavy footsteps. His heart sank as the door to the warehouse creaked open, revealing a familiar figure. Bruce Banner stood in the doorway, his expression grim, his eyes already glowing with the telltale green of the Hulk. Bruce, wait. Peter shouted, but his voice was drowned out by the roar of the machinery and the rising energy in the room. Banner stepped forward, his body already starting to transform. The muscles in his arms bulged, his skin taking on a greenish hue as the Hulk emerged. But this time there was no anger in his eyes, no wild, uncontrollable fury. Instead, there was a look of calm, of acceptance. I know what I'm doing, Peter, Banner said, his voice deepening as the Hulk's growl merged with his words. Gare, this is the only way. Peter shook his head, his mind racing. It's not Bruce. Marx is using you. But Banner wasn't listening. He stepped into the center of the room where Marx's machine waited, its lights flickering with anticipation. Bruce donned Peter yelled, but it was too late. Banner stepped into the machine, and the machine roared to life. The whole warehouse seemed to vibrate as the power surged through the wires and into the central device. Spider-Man watched helplessly as Bruce Banner, now fully transformed into the Hulk, stood inside the glowing apparatus, his massive frame bathed in the eerie green light of the gamma energy. Peter's mind raced, his instincts telling him to move, to act. But he couldn't. Not yet. One wrong move, and it could set everything off, and that might be the last chance Bruce had. Above the noise, Peter could just make out Dr. Marx's voice. The scientist had moved to a separate control panel, his fingers dancing across the keyboard. The grin on his face was unmistakable, now a mixture of triumph and greed. You will thank me for this, Banner, Marx said, his voice barely audible over the machinery. When you see what I can offer you. But Peter knew better. This wasn't about helping Bruce. This was about control, about power. Marx didn't want to cure Banner, he wanted to weaponize him. The Hulk let out a low growl, his massive fists tightening around the handles of the machine. His muscles flexed, bulging with raw power as the gamma energy swirled around him. For a brief moment, Peter caught a glimpse of Bruce's face beneath the monster. The calm determination he'd seen earlier was still there, but now it was mingled with pain. This wasn't just a decision for Banner. It was a sacrifice. Peter's spider sense flared, sharper than ever. Marx was up to something more dangerous than even he had anticipated. The energy in the room spiked, and Peter barely had time to react before Marx made his move. The scientist pressed a final button on the console, and the entire lab erupted into chaos. The machine encasing the Hulk exploded in a blaze of green light, sending shockwaves through the building. Peter instinctively dove for cover, webbing himself to the nearest wall as debris rained down around him. The force of the explosion knocked over equipment, shattered windows, and sent machinery flying in every direction. For a moment, the world was nothing but noise and light, a violent storm of gamma energy and raw power. When the dust settled, Peter peeled himself from the wall and surveyed the damage. The warehouse was in ruins, the central machine now a smoking pile of twisted metal. And at the center of it all, standing amidst the wreckage, was the Hulk. But something was different. The Hulk's usual posture, hunched and ready for a fight, had shifted. He stood tall, his massive shoulders relaxed, his eyes calm, almost too calm. Peter could sense it immediately. The Hulk wasn't angry. There was no rage, no destruction. This was a new kind of Hulk, one that Bruce Banner had complete control over, or at least that's what it looked like. Banner, or rather, the Hulk turned slowly to face Marx, who was standing at the far end of the room, grinning like a madman. It worked, Marx whispered, his voice filled with awe. It actually worked. The Hulk's eyes narrowed. You used me, he rumbled, his voice a deep earth-shaking growl. But unlike before, the words were clear, deliberate. This was Banner speaking, not the mindless rage of the Hulk. You didn't tell me the full cost. Marx's grin faltered. I gave you what you wanted, Banner control. Power, the ability to decide your own fate. Isn't that what you've always wanted? Banner's eyes blazed with anger, but it was a controlled anger. You lied, he growled. You didn't tell me I'd be stuck like this forever, Spider-Man leaped down from his perch, landing softly between the two. Bruce, we can fix this, Peter said, his voice calm but urgent. You don't have to do this, Banner glanced at Peter, the conflict evident on his massive green face. He wanted to believe Peter, but the temptation was strong. The power coursing through his veins felt right. For the first time in his life, he was the Hulk, but he wasn't a slave to his rage. He was in control, but at what cost? Marx took a step forward, his hands raised in a placating gesture. Banner, listen to me, you've always feared the Hulk, but now you can be the Hulk. Without losing yourself. Isn't that worth it? Isn't that what you wanted all along? The Hulk's fists clenched, and for a moment, Peter thought he might attack. But instead, Banner took a slow, deliberate breath, a breath that Peter recognized. It was the kind of breath that someone took when they were about to make a decision they couldn't come back from. I want to be your weapon, the Hulk said, his voice low and dangerous. Sorry, I won. You used me. Before Marx could respond, the Hulk lunged forward, his massive hand closing around Marx's control panel. With a single powerful motion, he ripped the machine from the floor and crushed it in his fist, sparks flying as the circuit shorted out. Marx's face twisted with rage. You fool, he screamed, his calm veneer finally cracking. Do you have any idea what you've done? You've destroyed the only way to control the gamma energy. Without that machine, you will be the Hulk forever. For a moment, there was silence. Even Peter felt the weight of Marx's word. Banner had made his choice, but now he would have to live with it. The Hulk stood tall, his gaze steady as he looked at Marx. Steer, I'd rather live as the Hulk than be controlled by you. Marx's eyes blazed with fury. You think this is over? I still have to. Before he could finish, Spider-Man shot a web at Marx's hand, yanking a small device from his grip. Marx let out a cry of frustration as Peter caught the device and crushed it in his hand. No more tricks, Peter said, his voice firm. Sauer and Ornermike started. Marx staggered back. his face pale. "You don't understand," Pray he whispered, his voice trembling with fear. "You've doomed him without my control, Banner. We'll never be able to change back." The Hulk let out a deep, rumbling growl, but there was no anger in his eyes, only acceptance. "Maybe I'll never be Banner again," he said slowly. "In Agema, still me, and I am not your weapon." Peter felt a surge of respect for his friend Bruce, had made the hardest decision of his life to live as the Hulk, fully aware of what that meant. But he had made the choice on his own terms, not as a pawn in someone else's game. As Marx backed away, defeated, the sound of sirens echoed in the distance. Peter turned to the Hulk, his heart heavy. "Prior Bruce, I am sorry." The Hulk shook his head. "John T.B., Peter, this was my choice, and I live with it." For a moment, the two stood in silence, the weight of everything that had happened settling around them. The sun was beginning to rise, casting a soft light over the ruined warehouse. It felt like the end of something, but also the beginning of something new. As the sirens grew closer, Peter gave the Hulk a small nod. "Sarah, you did the right thing, Bruce." The Hulk's lips twitched in what might have been a smile. "Hi, thanks, Peter." With that, Peter shot a web to the nearest building and swung away, leaving the Hulk to face the consequences of his decision. As he soared above the city, Peter couldn't help but feel a strange mix of emotion. Banner was the Hulk now, maybe forever, but he was also free in a way. Free from the fear, the rage, the constant struggle for control. And for Bruce Banner, maybe that was enough. Welcome to the story. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and support me. The city never slept, but tonight the streets of New York felt unnervingly quiet beneath the dark clouds swirling overhead. The looming shadows played tricks on the eyes, twisting reflections in windows and pulling at the edges of alleyways like phantoms. Peter Parker, swinging effortlessly between buildings, could feel the tension in the air like the prickle of static electricity. Something was coming. He just didn't know what. Spider-Man had been on patrol for a few hours, his senses heightened, waiting for a disturbance that he couldn't quite put his finger on. He had seen the headlines earlier about strange sightings in the sky, but the usual crackpots had cried, "Tier aliens," here so many times before that. Even Jonah Jameson's side raids couldn't summon more than a weary eye roll from Peter. Still, there was always that nagging voice inside him that refused to let go of suspicion, and tonight that voice screamed at him to stay alert. He shot a web to the next building, pulling himself through the air with ease. The wind felt cool on his skin through the thin fabric of his suit, but the humid thickness of the summer night stuck to him like glue. The usual sounds of the city below the honking horns, the murmurs of conversation muffled under the distant rumble of thunder. And then there it was. An explosion ripped through the silence, a blinding flash of light bursting from somewhere near Central Park. Spider-Man. Spider's sense flared as he adjusted mid-swing, launching himself toward the sound. Instinctively, his mind raced to prepare for what might come next. He'd faced all sorts of villains and threats before then, as aliens, crazy tech geniuses, but whatever this was, it had hit like a freight train. As he approached the park, the devastation became clear. Trees were splintered, the ground torn apart as if something massive had rampaged through. Fires erupted in scattered patches, sending plumes of smoke into the sky, and there, in the center of it all, stood the Hulk. Well, it was mostly Bruce Banner Hulk, so massive frame towered over the chaos, muscles taut beneath the green skin as he stared down the colossal alien beast lumbering through the park. But Peter could tell from the way Bruce was moving that he was struggling to keep the Hulk in check. His mind was caught somewhere in the middle of transformation, half man, half beast, and the cracks were showing. "Hulk," Peter called, landing gracefully on the charred remains of a park bench. "Need a hand?" Bruce turned, his eyes glazed with the internal battle between reason and rage. "Stay back, Parker. I am not sure I can hold him." "Yeah, sure, you say that. But when have I ever stayed back?" Peter quipped, shooting a web toward the nearest tree trunk and pulling himself into the air just as the beast let out an earth-shattering roar. The creature was massive, easily 4 stories tall, with thick, reptilian skin that gleamed under the flickering flame. It wasn't just big, it was armored too. Peter's eyes quickly scanned the beast's body, noting the intricate lines of some kind of tech fused with its biology. This thing wasn't just a mindless brute. It was a weapon. "Any idea how we retaking this thing down?" Peter called to Bruce even as he dodged a swipe from the creature, some massive tail. "Working on it? Bruce growled the Hulk, his voice edging in. He took a lumbering step toward the beast, fists clenched tight enough that Peter could hear the air crackle. Peter, flipping mid-air, shot a few web blasts at the creature, Seiss hoping to at least slow it down. But his webs splattered uselessly against its armored hide, barely making a dent. Okay, so that's not gonna work, Peter muttered to himself. He landed on a nearby tree branch, crouching low as he watched the Hulk charge forward, bellowing with fury. Bruce swung a massive fist at the creature, connecting with enough force to rattle windows several blocks away. The alien stumbled back, but quickly regained its footing. Peter's eyes narrowed as he noticed a faint glow emanating from the creature, such as some sort of control system embedded in its body. Of course, he whispered, it's being controlled. Before he could react, the beast lunged at the Hulk, and Bruce responded with another powerful blow. The force of the impact sent shockwaves through the ground, tearing up more debris and sending trees toppling over. Peter moved to react, but in that split second, disaster struck. The Hulk mid-swing lost control, his fists slammed into Peter with the force of a truck. Peter didn't even have time to react as he was sent flying through the air, his body crashing into a nearby building with bone-jarring force. His vision blurred, and for a moment, he felt nothing but the searing pain coursing through his body. When the world finally stopped spinning, Peter lay in a heap of rubble, gasping for air. His head pounded, his ribs felt like they'd been crushed, and worst of all, his web shooters were fried completely useless. Damn it, he groaned, trying to push himself up, but the pain was too much. Every movement sent sharp jolts through his muscles, and he could feel his strength ebbing away. Through the haze, he saw the Hulk still fighting the creature, but it was clear that Bruce was losing control. The beast's relentless attacks were pushing the Hulk further into rage, and that was never a good thing. Peter gritted his teeth, forcing himself to sit up. He couldn't swing, couldn't fight like he usually did, but he struck out of the fight yet. With a shaky breath, Peter assessed the situation. His webbed shooters were done, but his mind was still sharp. He could still help, just not in the way he was used to. Tapping his earpiece, Peter connected to Bruce. Hey, big guy, you might want to hold off on the rampage for a second. I think I figured something out. There was a grunt of acknowledgement from the Hulk, though it was clear Bruce was struggling to keep control. What is it? That thing, it's not just a big, ugly alien. It's being controlled. See the glowing spot on its chest that sensed the control system. If we can knock that out, the beast should shut down. The Hulk growled, taking a few steps back as the creature roared once more. Easier said than done. Yeah, I figured, Peter replied, pulling himself to his feet. His body screamed in protest, but he ignored the pain. But you, Hulk, right? You smash, I'll figure out the tech stuff. As the Hulk charged back into battle, Peter scrambled through the wreckage, searching for anything he could use. His mind raced as he analyzed the alien tech. He knew he didn't have much time. Bruce wouldn't be able to hold out forever, and the longer the fight went on, the more destruction the creature would cause. Peter's fingers found the remnants of a nearby streetlight. With a grunt, he ripped out the wiring, his mind already formulating a plan. If he could reroute the power from the streetlight into a makeshift pulse generator, he might be able to disrupt the control signal. Working quickly, Peter stripped the wires and connected them to his suit's power cell. He had no idea if this was going to work, but it was the best shot they had. Okay, let's see if I can still pull off a miracle, Peter muttered, his hands trembling slightly as he finished the device. He glanced up, just in time to see the Hulk deliver a devastating punch to the creature's sad chest. But the armor held firm. It was when Peter urged himself, tapping into his suit, send, interface, and rerouting the power. The makeshift pulse generator hummed to life, glowing faintly in his hands. Gotcha. Hey Hulk, get ready to smash, Peter called out, his voice strained but determined. The Hulk glanced back at him, eyes blazing with fury and barely contained rage. But Bruce was still in there, still holding on, and he nodded. Peter took a deep breath, steadying his shaking hands, and hurled the pulse generator toward the creature's south chest. It arched through the air, landing with perfect precision on the glowing control panel embedded in the creature's body. For a moment, nothing happened. And then a violent surge of energy erupted from the device. The control system crackled and sparked as the pulse disrupted the alien SEM connection. The beast let out a deafening roar, its massive body convulsing as it staggered backward. Hulk now, Peter shouted. With a bellow of rage, the Hulk lunged forward, his fists slamming into the creature's chest with enough force to shatter the armor. The beast, Sut's body crumpled under the impact, and with one final earth-shattering blow, the Hulk tore through the control system, sending a shower of sparks into the air. The alien beast collapsed to the ground, motionless. The battle was over. Peter slumped against a nearby wall, his body aching, but relief washed over him. "We did it," he breathed, the exhaustion catching up to him. Peter leaned heavily against the crumbled brick wall, his entire body aching from the battle. Every breath he took was labored, but the sight of the alien beast, lying still, its massive chest no longer rising and falling, brought a flicker of satisfaction to his exhausted mind. The Hulk stood over the fallen creature, his chest heaving from the exertion of the final blow. Bruce was still holding onto his rage, but Peter could see him fighting to regain control. "You okay, big guy?" Peter asked, managing a weak smile beneath his mouth. The air around them was thick with the scent of burning debris, the faint crackle of distant flames, the only sound cutting through the silence. But then slowly the Hulk's massive shoulders slumped. His breaths came out in deep, ragged huffs, and the tension in his muscles began to ease. With a shuddering breath, Bruce began to shrink. His monstrous frame reduced in size, the vibrant green of his skin fading back to the pale complexion of a man who had fought too many battles, both inside and out. Bruce Banner now stood in the place of the Hulk, sweat dripping from his forehead, as he leaned against the remains of a toppled tree for support. "Yep," Bruce said, his voice hoarse, "I am okay." Peter gave a half-hearted chuckle, wincing as the motion sent a sharp pain through his rib. "Fine. Okay, pretty sure I won. He'd be swinging around town for a bit, but at least we not dead." Bruce wiped a hand over his face, staring at the carnage around them. Not dead, but close. They stood there for a long moment, both men trying to catch their breath, letting the weight of what just happened sink in. The park was a wreck, trees uprooted, paths torn apart, debris scattered everywhere. Fires still burned in patches where the alien had ripped through the landscape. Peter's mind was already racing, calculating the extent of the damage and how long it would take for the city to recover from this latest disaster. But as the adrenaline began to fade, Peter felt the full extent of his injury. His legs wobbled beneath him, and he barely caught himself before collapsing completely. Bruce was at his side in an instant, helping him down to the ground as gently as he could. Even with Bruce's careful touch, Peter winced, his whole body screaming in protest. "We need to get you to a hospital," Bruce said, concerned, edge in his face. "No hospitals," Peter wheezed. "Can't he exactly check in as Spider-Man? Cannot." Bruce frowned, knowing Peter was right, but clearly uneasy about the state he was in. "There's gotta be something we can do. You re-hurt bad, Peter." Peter shook his head, gritting his teeth against the pain. "I'll heal. Just need a minute." Bruce sat down next to him, his gaze still fixed on the fallen alien beast. "I lost control back there," he muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. "If I'd stayed in control, maybe I wouldn't have hit you. Maybe I could." Peter cut him off, shaking his head. "It wasn't your fault, Bruce. That thing was huge, and we were outmatched from the start. You did what you had to do, and I am still in one piece, more or less." Bruce didn't tell it convinced, but he didn't, he argued. The two of them sat in silence for a few minutes, watching as the fires slowly burned themselves out. The distant wail of sirens began to rise over the city, signaling the arrival of first responders, though Peter knew they'd have no idea what to make of the scene. "We need to go before they get here," Peter said, struggling to his feet. He leaned heavily on Bruce, who helped him up, though. Peter could tell the scientist was still lost in his own thought. They started moving away from the wreckage, each step sending fresh waves of pain through Peter's body, but he forced himself to keep going. He didn't want to be here when the authorities arrived, especially not in his current state. As they reached the edge of the park, Peter finally turned to Bruce. "You did good today, Bruce. We both did. Don't you let this eat at you." Bruce didn't respond right away, but eventually he nodded. "Thanks, Peter. I'll try." Peter gave him a reassuring pat on the back, though it was more of a feeble tap given his condition. Together they slipped away from the scene, disappearing into the dark streets of the city before the authorities could catch up. By the time Peter made it back to his apartment, it was almost dawn. The sky was a dull shade of gray, the first hints of morning creeping in through the windows as he stumbled inside. Every inch of his body ached, and he was fairly certain he had at least one broken rib, but somehow he managed to make it to his couch before collapsing in a heap. His suit was torn in several places, the fabric singed and shredded from the battle. He could feel the sticky warmth of blood on his skin, though he wasn't sure how much of it was his own. With a groan, he peeled the mask off his face and tossed it aside, running a hand through his sweat-soaked hair. Note to self, Peter mumbled to no one in particular. Don't he get punched by the Hulk? He lay there for a while, staring up at the ceiling as the exhaustion pulled at him. His mind raced through everything that had happened, the alien beast, the Hulk's near loss of control, his own near-death experience. It wasn't the first time he faced impossible odds, but it never got any easier. Eventually, Peter forced himself to sit up, wincing as the motion sent pain shooting through his side. He needed to clean up and check his injuries before he could even think about resting. With great effort, he managed to strip out of the ruined suit and limp to the bathroom, where he grabbed a first aid kit from under the sink. As he worked on patching himself up, his phone buzzed from the coffee table. He ignored it at first too, focused on cleaning the cuts and bruises that littered his body. But when it buzzed again, more insistently this time, he let out a frustrated sigh and limped back to grab it. It was a message from Bruce. "Hugh? Okay." Peter stared at the screen for a moment before typing a reply. "I've been better. How about you?" There was a brief pause before Bruce responded. "Physically fine, mentally still working on that." Peter sighed, running a hand over his face. He knew Bruce was dealing with more than just physical pain. The constant struggle between his human self and the Hulk took a toll, and today had been a reminder of just how precarious that balance could be. "You did good today, Bruce, don't you forget that." Another pause, longer this time, and Peter could almost feel Bruce wrestling with his response. "Thanks, Peter. Take care of yourself." Peter smiled faintly and set the phone down. He would take care of himself eventually, right now. All he wanted was to sleep for about a week. With his injuries tended to as best as he could manage, Peter collapsed back onto the couch, pulling a blanket over himself. His muscles screamed in protest, but his mind was already drifting, the exhaustion finally overtaking him. Peter woke to the sound of his phone buzzing again, though. This time, it wasn't TA message from Bruce. It was a news alert, and with a groggy groan, he grabbed his phone to check it. "Alien invasion thwarted by Avengers." The headline read. He scrolled through the article, eyes scanning the familiar name. There was no mention of him specifically, of course, just a vague acknowledgement of collaborating heroes. That was fine by him. He didn't want to do it for the recognition. But as he scrolled further, his heart sank. Reports of civilians injured in the chaos. Property damage estimates in the millions. Lives turned upside down by yet another attack on the city. Peter sighed, tossing the phone aside again. He knew he'd done everything he could, but it never felt like enough. Not when people still got hurt. He pushed himself up from the couch, wincing as his muscles protested the movement. The sun was fully up now, casting warm light through the windows and filling the room with a soft glow. It was a new day, but it felt like the weight of the previous night still clung to him like a shadow. But he was Spider-Man, and no matter how many battles he fought, no matter how many times he got knocked down, he would keep getting back up. Because that's what heroes did. With a determined grunt, Peter stood, his body aching, but his resolve unshaken. He had work to do. There was always work to do. And as long as there were people to protect, as long as there were threats to face, Spider-Man would be there, ready to swing into action. Welcome to the story. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and support me. The streets of New York hummed with the usual chaos, blaring horns, bustling pedestrians, and the distant wail of siren. Amidst the cacophony, Peter Parker was perched on the ledge of a midtown skyscraper, his mask half pulled up as he devoured a hot dog. It was a rare moment of calm in the life of Spider-Man. But even on his days off, he couldn't help but keep his eyes on the city. With everything going on, the rogue aliens last week, Wilson Fisk scheming yet again, and an uptick in crime, he had earned this small, greasy indulgence. Just as he was about to take a final bite, his phone buzzed in his pocket. Pulling it out, he scanned the screen to see several news alerts about a Hulk sighting. Banner had been spotted tearing through a small suburb upstate. Peter frowned. Hulk had been trying hard to stay off the radar lately, especially after everything that happened with the Avengers. He and Bruce weren't exactly close, but they had shared enough experiences, enough bruised knuckles and half-baked quips that Peter knew something had to be wrong. Without thinking twice, he stuffed the rest of the hot dog in his mouth, yanked his mask back down, and shot a web to the nearest building. Swinging through the city felt natural. He moved with the same grace and ease as breathing, the wind slicing past him, the hum of the city fading into the background. His thoughts, though, raced ahead. Something about the reports felt off. Hulk didn't randomly smash things anymore, at least not unless Bruce lost control, which hadn't happened in a long time. Within minutes, he arrived at the location where the Hulk had last been seen. The aftermath of destruction was easy to spot: a series of crumpled cars, splintered streetlights, and a massive gouge in the side of a nearby building. Spider-Man landed lightly on the edge of the scene, his eyes scanning the wreckage for any sign of the big green guy. Suddenly, he heard it, a deep, rumbling growl that made the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. From around the corner, the Hulk emerged, his massive frame casting a shadow over the debris. Peter's spider sense tingled, warning him that something was very, very wrong. "Hulk," Peter shouted, raising his hands in what he hoped was a calming gesture. "Hey, buddy, what's that going on? Let's talk this out." But the Hulk didn't respond. His eyes were wild, his breath labored. This wasn't the calm, restrained Bruce that Peter knew. The Hulk let out a roar that shook the ground and charged at Peter with terrifying speed. Peter barely had time to react, shooting a web to the side and yanking himself out of the way as the Hulk's massive fists slammed into the ground where he had been standing just moments before. The concrete shattered beneath the force of the blow. "Okay, that's new," Peter muttered, flipping backward and landing on a nearby streetlight. He fired off a few more webs, swinging in a wide arc to get some distance. "Bruce, come on, talk to me. I know you read in there." But there was no response, only rage. The Hulk tore through the street, tossing aside cars like toys and smashing anything in his path. Spider-Man ducked and dodged, doing his best to avoid the blows while trying to figure out how to stop his friend without causing more damage. His mind raced through the options. He couldn't just knock out the Hulk, not without serious firepower. But something else had to be going on here. Banner wouldn't lose control like this unless something was seriously wrong. Spider-Man shot a web at the Hulk at back, using the momentum to swing himself forward and land on the giant's high shoulder. "Sorry about this, big guy," he shouted, slamming a web grenade against the Hulk. Mech. The device exploded in a burst of sticky webbing, wrapping around the Hulk's head and temporarily blinding him. The Hulk roared, thrashing wildly as he tried to tear the webbing off his face. Peter held on for dear life, trying to find some way to get through to Bruce. "Bruce, listen to me. I don't know what's going on, but you've got to fight this. You were stronger than whatever's controlling you." But the Hulk wasn't listening. With a final earth-shaking roar, he grabbed Spider-Man by the leg and hurled him across the street. Peter crashed into a building, the impact rattling his bone. He groaned, pushing himself up from the rubble. His spider sense flared again, and he barely had time to roll out of the way as the Hulk slammed both fists into the ground where he had been lying. This was bad, really bad. Peter fired off another web, yanking himself into the air and putting some distance between him and the Hulk. He needed a plan fast, but before he could come up with one, a familiar voice echoed in his earpiece. "Spider-Man, this is Dr. Strange. I've been monitoring the situation. It seems Bruce is under some kind of psychic control." Peter swung to the top of a nearby building, breathing heavily as he listened to Strange. "Clarence, yeah, I figured that part out. Any idea how to stop it?" "There is no physical way to sever the connection," Strange replied. "The only way to help Bruce is to enter his mind and free him from within." Peter's stomach tightened at the thought entering the Hulk's mind. That sounded like a recipe for disaster. But what other choice did he have if he didn't act fast? Bruce would tear the city apart. "Okay, Doc," Peter said, steeling himself for what was to come. "How do we do that?" "I'll open a portal to Bruce's subconscious," Strange explained. "But once you're inside, you'll be on your own." The Hulk said, "Mind is a dangerous place, even for someone like you. Be prepared for anything." Peter nodded, even though Strange couldn't see him. "Got it, just don't. Let me get squished out here." A moment later, a shimmering portal appeared in the air before him, crackling with energy. Peter took a deep breath and swung toward it, diving headfirst into the unknown. The transition was disorienting. One moment, Peter was surrounded by the familiar sights and sounds of New York. The next, he was in a strange, surreal landscape. The sky above was a sickly shade of green, swirling with dark cloud. The ground beneath his feet was jagged and uneven, littered with massive chunks of debris that floated in the air like weightless islands. This was Bruce Banner's mind-twisted, chaotic, and filled with the remnants of a lifetime's worth of trauma. Peter took a cautious step forward, his senses on high alert. The air here felt heavy, oppressive, as if the weight of Bruce's inner turmoil was pressing down on him. He could feel the Hulk-side presence all around him, an overwhelming sense of anger and frustration that threatened to suffocate him. "Bruce," Peter called out, his voice echoing through the strange landscape. "It's me, Peter. I am here to help you." There was no response, only silence. Peter pressed on, moving deeper into the mindscape. He passed by fragments of Bruce's memories, brief, flickering images of his life before the hulk, of the gamma radiation that had changed him forever, and of the countless battles he had fought as both Bruce and the Hulk. Each memory seemed to bleed into the next, a constant reminder of the duality that defined Bruce's existence. As Peter ventured further, he began to notice a change in the atmosphere. The air grew colder, the ground more treacherous, and then in the distance, he saw a massive, hulking figure standing atop a cliff, its back turned to him. The Hulk. But this wasn't the Hulk Peter had fought in the real world. This version of the Hulk was different, larger, more menacing. His skin was darker, almost black, and his eyes glowed with an eerie, unnatural light. This was the Hulk's rage, fully manifested and twisted by the unknown force controlling Bruce's mind. Peter's heart pounded in his chest as he approached the figure. He had no idea how he was going to get through to Bruce, but he had to try. Fast. If he didn't, the real world, wouldn't he survive the Hulk's wrath? "Bruce," Peter shouted, his voice strained with desperation. "I know you're in there. You've got to fight this." The Hulk didn't move for a long moment. There was only the sound of the howling wind and the distant rumble of thunder. Then slowly, the Hulk turned to face him. His eyes burned with fury, his massive fists clenched at his side. And when he spoke, his voice was a deep guttural growl that sent chills down Peter's spine. "Banner is gone." Peter's breath caught in his throat. This wasn't the Bruce he knew, not even the Hulk. This was something darker, an embodiment of raw, unchecked fury. Spider-Man flexed his fingers, instinctively preparing for a fight he was sure he could win. But fighting wasn't the point. He had to get through to Bruce somehow. "Banner isn't gone," Peter said, voice steady despite the pounding in his chest. "He's still in there. I know he is." The Hulk, this twisted version of him, let out a low, menacing growl, his glowing eyes locking onto Peter. "You are too weak. Banner cannot save you, and neither can I." Before Peter could respond, the Hulk lunged. He moved with a terrifying speed for something so massive, his fists aimed at Peter's skull. Spider-Man's instincts kicked in, and he dove to the side, barely dodging the crushing blow. The ground cracked and splintered beneath the Hulk's sized fists, sending shards of debris flying through the air. Peter somersaulted and fired off 2 quick web blasts, hoping to at least slow the Hulk down. The webbing stuck to the Hulk's chest and shoulders, but he tore through it like tissue paper. His rage only seemed to intensify as he charged again, his fists smashing through the floating debris that littered the landscape. This wasn't just about stopping the Hulk anymore. This was about survival. Peter dodged and weaved, using every bit of his agility to stay one step ahead of the giant's relentless attack. His mind raced, trying to figure out a way to get through to Bruce without getting crushed in the process. The Hulk-sized fists were like sledgehammers, each swing capable of leveling buildings, and Peter knew he couldn't keep this up forever. "Bruce, come on," Peter shouted, his voice echoing in the strange, surreal landscape. "I know you're in there. Fight this." But the Hulk wasn't through listening. With a roar that seemed to shake the very ground beneath them, he grabbed a massive chunk of debris and hurled it at Peter with deadly precision. Peter shot a web to a nearby floating boulder, yanking himself out of the way just in time. The chunk of debris exploded against the ground where he'd been standing, sending a shockwave through the area. Peter's chest heaved as he landed on the boulder, trying to catch his breath. This wasn't working. The Hulk wasn't just out of control. He was being driven by something darker, something more powerful than Peter had ever faced. And then in the midst of the chaos, Peter felt an oppressive presence pressing down on him, heavy and malevolent. It wasn't just the Hulk's surge rage that he was fighting. There was something else, lurking in the shadows of Bruce's mind, pulling the string. Peter's spider sense flared, and he instinctively leapt off the boulder just as the Hulk slammed into it with both fists, shattering it into a million pieces. He landed on the ground, rolling to his feet, his mind racing. If he was going to get through to Bruce, he had to find the source of this control. He had to get to the root of what was manipulating him. Dodging another thunderous blow, Peter shot a web into the distance, swinging away from the Hulk and into the darker corners of the mindscape. The Hulk let out a frustrated roar, but didn't hear follow. Peter's Cianart heart pounded as he swung deeper into the surreal landscape, the oppressive presence growing stronger with each passing moment. The air around him grew colder, and the strange green sky darkened as he neared the source of the manipulation. In the distance, he saw a dark, swirling mass of energy, pulsating with malevolence, the force controlling Bruce. Peter dropped down to the ground, cautiously approaching the swirling mass. His spider sense was going haywire, but he pressed forward. If he was going to save Bruce, this was the only way. As he got closer, the air around him seemed to thrum with dark energy, and Peter could feel the weight of the presence pressing down on him. The swirling mass pulsed with a sinister rhythm as if it were alive, feeding on the Hulk's sign rage. "Okay, this is officially above my pay grade," Peter muttered, taking a deep breath, but here goes nothing. He reached out with one hand, his fingers brushing the edge of the swirling energy. The moment he made contact, the world around him shifted. Suddenly, Peter was no longer in the strange, chaotic mindscape. He was standing in a vast, empty void, the swirling energy surrounding him like a living entity. And then from the darkness, a figure emerged, a tall, shadowy figure with glowing eyes, its form shifting and writhing like smoke. "You were too late, Spider-Man," the figure said, its voice echoing through the void. "Bruce Banner belongs to me now." Peter narrowed his eyes, his hands clenched into fists. "Who are you?" The figure chuckled, a low, menacing sound that sent chills down Peter's spine. "I am the one who has unlocked the true power of the Hulk. The rage, the anger, the destruction is all mine to control, and soon the world will know the true meaning of fear." Peter felt his stomach drop. This was worse than he thought. Whoever this was, they weren't just controlling Bruce, they were feeding off his anger, amplifying it, using it as a weapon. "Not gonna happen," Peter said, his voice firm. "Bruce is stronger than you think, and I am not leaving here without him." The figure laughed again, a cruel mocking sound. "You cannot defeat me, Spider-Man. I am the embodiment of rage itself. The Hulk said power is mine, and soon it will consume you as well." Peter braced himself as the shadowy figure lunged toward him, its form shifting and expanding as it came. He dodged to the side, narrowly avoiding the attack, and shot a web at the figure's sensor. The web stuck for a moment, but the figure tore through it with ease, its body reforming as if the attack hadn't even phased it. This wasn't going to be easy. Peter fired off another web, swinging around the figure in a wide arc. He needed to stay mobile, stay out of its reach, but every time he tried to land a hit, the figure would dissolve into smoke, reforming a moment later and coming at him again with renewed fury. "Come on, Bruce," Peter muttered under his breath, dodging another attack. "I could really use some help here." And then, just as the figure lunged at him again, Peter felt a flicker of something deep within the void. It was faint, but it was there. Bruce. Peter's eyes widened. There was still a part of Bruce that hadn't been consumed by the rage, a part that was still fighting. He just had to reach it. "Bruce," Peter shouted, his voice echoing through the void. "I know you can hear me. You've got to fight this." The figure snarled, its eyes glowing brighter with fury. "Banner is mine. You cannot save him." But Peter didn't stop. He swung around the figure again, dodging its attacks and firing off webs in quick succession. "Bruce, come on. This isn't you. You are stronger than this." For a moment, the figure hesitated, its form flickering. Peter pressed on, his voice louder, now more urgent. "You re not just the Hulk, you re Bruce Banner, the guy who helped save the world a dozen times over. Dante, let this thing control you." The figure let out a roar of frustration, its form growing unstable as it lashed out at Peter. But Peter could feel it. Bruce was fighting back, he just needed one more push. "Bruce," Peter shouted, his voice cutting through the chaos. "I believe in you." And then all at once, the figure froze, its form shimmered and flickered, the dark energy surrounding it beginning to unravel. Peter could feel the presence weakening, its control over Bruce slipping away. "No," the figure screamed, its voice filled with desperation. "This cannot be." But it was too late. The dark energy that had once controlled the Hulk began to dissipate, dissolving into the void like mist. And as it faded, Peter felt the oppressive weight lift from his shoulder. The void around him began to shift again, the swirling darkness giving way to the familiar landscape of Bruce's mind. And there, standing before him, was Bruce Banner. He looked tired, worn down, but he was himself again. Peter Brusane's voice was hoarse, barely more than a whisper. You saved me. Peter let out a breath he realized he'd been holding a relieved smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. Yeah, well, couldn't I let you smash up New York again? It's kind of my thing. Bruce managed a weak chuckle, but his expression quickly turned somber. That thing, whatever it was, it almost had me. Peter nodded, stepping closer. But it did till you fought back. You were stronger than it was. Bruce's yellow eyes flickered with doubt, but he nodded slowly. I couldn't have done it without you. Peter grinned, slinging an arm around Bruce's shoulder. That's what friends are for. As the last remnants of the dark energy faded, the world around them began to shift again, the landscape of Bruce and mind fading into the background as reality reasserted itself. Peter blinked, and suddenly they were back in the... Welcome to the story. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and support me. Peter Parker could still remember the exact moment it happened. It was supposed to be just another patrol swinging through the city with his usual flair, the sound of his web shooters cutting through the air, the wind whipping around his body as he soared between skyscrapers. New York had seen its fair share of trouble in the past week, but nothing Spider-Man couldn't handle, or so he thought. That night was different. It was the kind of night where the air felt heavier, where every sound seemed amplified as if the city itself was holding its breath. Peter's instincts were sharp, honed from years of battling villains ranging from street thugs to cosmic threat. When he first sensed something was off, it wasn't the usual tingle in the back of his neck, but a deeper feeling of wrongness in the air. He followed that instinct to an abandoned lab tucked away in a forgotten corner of Manhattan's industrial sector. His webs clung to the cracked windows as he swung in, the darkness inside swallowing the light from the city streets behind him. He landed with a soft thud, his feet barely making a sound as he crouched, scanning the dim room. The lab was ancient, filled with outdated computers and equipment that looked like it hadn't been touched in decades. Dust covered every surface, except for a few places where something or someone had clearly disturbed it recently. Spider-Man had seen enough abandoned labs to know when something was still in use, even if it didn't seem like it. His spider sense tingled again, urging him to stay on high alert. Okay, Parker, stay sharp, he muttered to himself, moving cautiously through the lab. His mask-ish lenses adjusted to the low light, giving him a better view of the room, content. It was then that he noticed a faint greenish glow emanating from a sealed chamber in the far corner. The chamber looked like something out of a sci-fi movie, with reinforced glass and thick metal wall. Inside, the glow pulsed rhythmic, almost alive. Peter's curiosity got the better of him. He moved closer, examining the controls on the side. His fingers hovered over the buttons, hesitating for a moment before he tapped a key. The chamber hissed as it slowly began to open, releasing a wave of cold air that brushed against his skin, sending a shiver down his spine. Peter stepped back, instinctively raising his web shooters, ready for anything, but nothing happened. At first, then, without warning, a burst of gamma radiation erupted from the chamber, flooding the room with a blinding green light. Peter tried to move, but it was too late. The energy washed over him, searing his skin and rattling his bones. It felt like fire and ice at the same time, tearing through his body, breaking him down only to rebuild him in the same breath. He screamed, the sound echoing off the walls of the empty lab as he collapsed to the floor, his body convulsing. His spider sense flared, wildly warning him of danger, but there was nowhere to run. The pain was overwhelming, consuming every thought, every sense. And then just as suddenly as it had started, it stopped. Peter lay there, gasping for breath, his body drenched in sweat. His heart pounded in his chest, each beat a reminder that he was still alive barely. What the hell was that? He groaned, struggling to push himself up. His limbs felt heavy, unresponsive, but he forced himself to his feet. The chamber was silent now, the green glow fading into nothingness. Peter looked down at his hands, expecting to see some kind of burn or injury, but there was nothing. No visible damage, no sign of the intense radiation that had just hit him, except for the fact that he felt different. There was a strange sensation under his skin, like his entire body was humming with energy. His muscles tensed, stronger than they had ever been before. His spider sense, usually a subtle tingle, was now a constant buzz, almost painful in its intensity. And then there was the web. Without thinking, Peter raised his wrists and fired a web at the ceiling. The familiar thurip echoed through the room, but something was off. The web was different, thicker, heavier, and glowing faintly with a greenish hue. It stuck to the ceiling with a crackling sound, as if it was laced with some kind of energy. "What the hell?" Peter muttered, pulling on the web to test its strength. It didn't break. In fact, it seemed stronger than any web he had ever produced, but there was something else, something dangerous about it. He shot another web, this time aiming at the wall. The moment it touched the surface, the web sizzled, burning through the metal like acid. Peter's eyes widened in shock as he watched the wall disintegrate under the web. Such touch. "Okay, this is bad," he whispered to himself, his mind racing. Gamma radiation, that's what it was. He had been exposed to gamma radiation, and somehow it had fused with his spider ability. But what did that mean? Was he stronger now, more powerful? Or was he becoming something else entirely? Peter didn't have time to figure it out. His spider sense flared in more violently this time, as if warning him of something far worse than anything he had ever faced. He had to get out of there fast. He swung out of the lab, the greenish glow of his webs lighting up the night as he shot through the city. But as he moved, he realized something was wrong. His body felt unstable, as if the gamma energy inside him was fighting for control. Every swing was a struggle, every movement a battle between his mind and his body. He needed help, and there was only one person he could think of who might understand what was happening to him. Peter had only met Bruce Banner a handful of times, but each encounter left an impression. Banner was the kind of guy who carried the weight of the world on his shoulders literally and figuratively. Peter had always admired him, not just for his brilliance, but for his ability to live with the monster inside him. It wasn't something Peter could truly understand before, but now as he stood outside Banner's remote cabin in the woods, he felt like they were more alike than ever. Bruce answered the door with a look of surprise. Peter. "Bruce, I need your help," Peter said, his voice strained. He didn't dare for an invitation. He stepped inside, collapsing into a chair, as the exhaustion of the night's set events finally caught up with him. Bruce closed the door behind him, his expression shifting from surprise to concern. "How it happened?" Peter held out his hand, shooting a strand of the glowing green web across the room. It stuck to the far wall with a crackling hiss, burning a hole through the wooden surface. Bruce's eyes widened. Peter nodded, his face pale. "I got hit with a massive dose of it. Now, don't know what's happening to me. I feel stronger, but I am losing control. My webs they read dangerous, Bruce. I don't know how long I can keep this in check." Bruce paced the room, his mind racing. He had seen what gamma radiation could do. He had lived it. But Peter was different. His body had already been altered by the spider bite, giving him powers no ordinary human had. The combination of spider DNA and gamma energy was unprecedented. "I need to run some tests," Bruce said, grabbing his equipment. "We have to figure out how much gamma energy is in your system, and if it's going to stabilize or keep mutating to your..." Peter nodded, too tired to argue. He trusted Bruce. If anyone could help him, it was the guy who had spent half his life dealing with gamma radiation. As Bruce worked, Peter tried to stay calm, but the sensation under his skin was growing more intense. It wasn't just the webs. His entire body felt like it was buzzing with energy, and his emotions were becoming harder to control. He clenched his fists, trying to steady his breathing, but every time he thought about what was happening to him, a surge of anger bubbled up from deep inside. Bruce noticed the change you were feeling, aren't you? The anger. Peter's jaw tightened. It's the gamma energy. It doesn't just affect your body, it affects your mind. That's why I've always had to keep the Hulk in check, but with you, this is different. Your spider abilities are amplifying the effect. Peter looked at his hands, the faint green glow still lingering around his fingertips. What do I do?" Bruce sighed, running a hand through his hair. "You need to learn control. It's not going to be easy, but you have to fight it. If you let the gamma energy take over, you could hurt a lot of people." Peter nodded, determination settling in his chest. He had been through worse. He had fought aliens, demons, even gods. This was just another battle won against himself. Bruce set up a training regimen for Peter designed to help him harness the gamma energy without letting it consume him. They spent days in the cabin, testing Peter's limits, pushing him to the brink of exhaustion. Each time Peter learned a little more about his new powers he could produce. He could produce webs that were unlike anything he had ever imagined. The gamma-infused strands were not just strong, they were practically indestructible. Even more astonishing was their versatility. By focusing, Peter could control the intensity of the gamma energy in his web. At a lower concentration, they behaved like his normal webs, but if he pushed too hard, the webs would burn through steel, dissolve concrete, and even emit bursts of gamma radiation that could knock down opponents. But with this power came a price. The more he used the webs, the more he felt his body shift. His muscles would bulge, his veins would pulse with a sickly green hue, and his skin would tingle, almost as if it were on fire from the inside out. Each time it became harder to pull himself back from the edge. Bruce could see it too, and it worried him. He knew what it felt like to lose control, and he could see the signs in Peter, the small moments where anger flashed in his eyes, the way his voice would rise when things didn't go as planned. Bruce tried to remain calm, supportive. "You're doing great, Peter. It's a slow process, but you're relearning how to control it. Just don't push too hard. The more you fight it, the more they'll push back." Peter nodded. Wiping sweat from his brow, he was exhausted, both physically and mentally. He had been pushing himself to the limit for days, determined to master these new powers, but every day brought new challenges. His webs were just the beginning. His strength had nearly doubled, and his reflexes were faster than ever, but his body felt unstable, like it was constantly teetering on the edge of something dangerous. One evening, after a particularly grueling training session, Peter sat on the porch of Bruce's cabin, staring out at the forest. The sun was setting, casting a warm glow over the trees, but Peter's mind was far from peaceful. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was coming, that his time was running out. Bruce joined him, handing him a bottle of water. "How you were thinking about it? Aren't to you the transformation?" Peter nodded, taking a sip of water.
Yeah.
It's like every time I use the webs, every time I tap into the gamma energy, I feel it pulling me deeper. I don't know how much longer I can keep it in check. Bruce leaned back in his chair, staring up at the sky. It's that fine line. You have to find balance. It's not about suppressing it. It's about learning to live with it. It's all that I've all learned with the Hulk. The more I tried to fight him, the stronger he became. But when I started accepting that he was a part of me, things changed. Peter sighed, running a hand through his hair. "How about what if I can? It's taught. What if this gamma energy, takes over? What if I hurt someone?" Bruce was silent for a moment, choosing his words carefully. "Then we will deal with it together. You were not alone in this, Peter." Before Peter could respond, his spider sense flared, a sharp jolt of warning that made him jump to his feet. He scanned the trees, his senses on high alert. "What is it?" Bruce asked, already on his feet, his eyes narrowing. "I don't know," Peter said, his voice tense. "Something's coming." No sooner had the words left his mouth than a group of figures emerged from the trees, moving swiftly and silently toward the cabin. They were dressed in sleek black armor, their faces obscured by helmets. But it wasn't their appearance that set Peter on edge. It was the tech they carried. Each of them held devices that crackled with green energy unmistakably designed to counter gamma radiation. "Bruce, we've got company," Peter said, stepping forward, his hands already raised, ready to fire his web. Bruce's expression darkened as he recognized the Tekra anti-gamma agents. "They were here for you, Peter." The agents moved in quickly, surrounding the cabin. Peter wasted no time, firing a strand of his gamma-charged webbing at the nearest agent. It wrapped around him, the green energy sparking as it made contact with the agent's sun armor. But instead of incapacitating him, the armor absorbed the energy, neutralizing the web. "Not good," Peter muttered, dodging as another agent lunged at him, brandishing a baton that crackled with electricity. Bruce, seeing the danger, let out a deep breath, his eyes turning green as he began to transform. "Get ready," he growled as the Hulk emerged, his massive form towering over the agent. The battle that followed was chaotic. Peter's gamma webs were powerful, but the agents were prepared. Their suits were designed to withstand gamma radiation, and they moved with military precision, attacking Peter and the Hulk in unison. Peter fought fiercely, dodging and weaving between the agents, firing webs in every direction. He managed to take down a few, but the longer the fight went on, the more he could feel the gamma energy building inside him. His vision blurred, his muscles ached, and his control began to slip. "Hulk, I can see." Peter tried to shout, but his voice was drowned out by the roar of the Hulk as he smashed through a group of agents, sending them flying. Peter's body pulsed with gamma energy, his skin glowing green as the transformation took hold. He could feel his strength increasing, his senses sharpening, but his mind was slipping. The anger, the rage, it was overwhelming. He lashed out, sending a wave of gamma-charged webs at the agents, the energy burning through their armor, disintegrating everything it touched. Peter stopped. Bruce's voice broke through the haze, but it was too late. Peter had lost control. The gamma energy surged through him, twisting his body, warping his power. His webs became unstable, their glow intensifying as they spiraled out of control. He tried to rein it in, but the energy was too much. It was as if the gamma radiation had taken over, and he was just a passenger in his own body. But even in his chaotic state, Peter knew he couldn't let the agents win. He forced himself to focus, to hold on to whatever shred of control he had left. With a surge of effort, he aimed his webs at the remaining agents, using every ounce of strength to hold them at bay. One by one, the agents fell, their tech no match for the raw power of Peter's gamma-infused web. But the victory felt hollow. Peter could barely stand, his body trembling with the aftershocks of the gamma surge. Bruce, now back in his human form, rushed to Peter's side. "Peter, you have to calm down. You're pushing too hard." I can see the Peter gasped, his vision fading in and out. Bruce placed a hand on his shoulder, his voice steady. "Guide, yes, you can. You got this, Peter. Breathe, focus." Peter closed his eyes, forcing himself to take slow, deep breath. The gamma energy inside him began to subside, the green glow fading from his skin. It took every ounce of willpower he had, but finally, the energy receded, leaving him exhausted but in control. I am okay," Peter muttered, collapsing to the ground. Bruce knelt beside him, his expression grimace. "This isn't an over, Peter. Whoever sent those agents, they won. He stopped. They know about you now, and they'll be back." Peter nodded weakly, his mind racing. He knew Bruce was right. This was just the beginning. Whoever was behind the attack wanted his gamma powers, and they weren't going to stop until they got what they wanted. But Peter wasn't going to give up that easily. He had been through too much, fought too many battles to let this one break him. He would find out who was behind the attack, and when he did, he would make sure they never threatened him or anyone else again. As he lay there catching his breath, Peter knew one thing for certain. The fight for control had only just begun. Welcome to the story. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and support me. The harsh wind swept across the barren desert landscape, kicking up spirals of sand and dust. Beneath the fading twilight, a forgotten facility stood like a sentinel, silent secret, and abandoned by those who feared the truth. Inside, where the air was thick with the stench of failure, Bruce Banner moved silently through dimly lit hallways, his heart heavy with the burden of his past. The eerie quiet was familiar, unsettling, and it brought memories of times when he was a monster of his own making. Bruce had spent years trying to distance himself from the Hulk, from the gamma radiation that coursed through his veins, but the world never let him escape. This time, it was a whisper on the wind, rumors of experiments using gamma energy in the government's relentless pursuit of a perfect soldier. That's why he was here, moving quietly through the shadows of this remote facility, hoping to stop another disaster before it began. His earpiece crackled softly. "Banner, I think I've found something." Peter Parker's sass voice was a breath of relief in the oppressive silence. Young, hopeful, and impossibly resilient, Peter was everything Bruce once was. But by age, shared responsibility for powers they never asked for. "Where are you?" Bruce's voice was low, cautious. "Second floor, Lab C. You're going to want to see this." Banner quickened his pace. Lab C was deep within the facility, hidden behind layers of security and the stench of secrecy. His mind raced with possibilities, none of them good. The last time he encountered a facility like this, it had ended in death, destruction, and a Hulk rampage that nearly leveled an entire town. As he turned a corner, the dim glow of Peter's eyesight greeted him. The young man, clad in his red and blue Spider-Man suit, was crouched over a console, his eyes flicking rapidly between the screen. Bruce stepped forward, his breath shallow as he took in the sight before him. On the screen were images, x-rays, medical reports, and thermal scans of men soldiers twisted into monstrous shape. Their bodies were racked with gamma mutations, muscles swollen and deformed, skin tinted with a sickly green glow. Their faces, contorted in pain, stared blankly at the camera. Soldiers who had signed up to be heroes now looked like nightmares. They were trying to replicate the serum, Churcher said quietly, his voice filled with an uncomfortable realization. They were using gamma radiation to create super soldiers, but something went wrong. Bruce swallowed hard. He had seen this before. He was living proof of what gamma radiation could do when it was mishandled. The Hulk was the result of one man's ambition, but this was something else. I should have seen this coming, Bruce muttered, rubbing a hand over his weary face. They used my research, they used me as a blueprint. Peter glanced up at him, concern etched in his youthful face. Tara, but this wasn't you, Bruce. You did do this. They did. Bruce wanted to believe that, but the guilt clung to him like a shadow. He knew that no matter how far he ran, the Hulk would always be used as a weapon, a cautionary tale, or worse, a blueprint for something even more dangerous. Peter continued tapping at the console, pulling up more data. It looks like the soldiers were exposed to unstable gamma isotope. Their bodies couldn't handle it. The mutations say he paused, his fingers stilling. They were not in control, Bruce. These guys, they were ticking time bombs. There was a countdown. Buried deep in the code of the experiment, the log. Each of the soldiers' vitals was being monitored in real time, and the readings were off the chart. Heart rates spiked, gamma radiation levels surged, and the data screamed one inevitable truth. These soldiers were about to explode. How much time do we have? Bruce asked, his voice tight with urgency. Not long, Peter said, pulling up a map of the facility. Yuri, maybe an hour or two at most. If we don't do something soon, the gamma energy in their bodies is going to overload, and they'll blow like gamma bombs too. Bruce's stomach twisted. Peter nodded, already swinging into action. He fired a web line at the ceiling and vaulted forward, disappearing into the darkness ahead. Bruce followed, his mind racing. There had to be a way to reverse the mutations to stabilize the soldiers before their bodies gave out. As they descended deeper into the facility, the air grew thick with the smell of burning metal and ozone. The lights flickered overhead, casting eerie shadows on the wall. Somewhere deep in the bowels of the facility, the soldiers, or what remained of them, were lurking, their bodies breaking down under the strain of uncontrollable power. Bruce Peter called back from ahead, their movement up ahead. They slowed their pace, approaching the massive containment chamber at the heart of the facility. The doors were reinforced steel, but they had been torn apart as though they were paper. Beyond the wreckage, the sounds of heavy breathing and low rumbling growls filled the air. Bruce's heart pounded in his chest as they entered the chamber. Inside, the gamma soldiers were clustered together, their bodies swollen with radiation. They looked more like creatures than men, their eyes glowing with an unnatural green light. Their muscles bulged, veins pulsing with energy that was barely contained beneath their skin. One of the soldiers turned, its glowing eyes locking onto Bruce. It let out a guttural roar, the sound vibrating through the air like an earthquake. The creature lunged forward, but its movements were slow, heavy, as though it was fighting against its own body. Peter moved in a blur, swinging across the chamber and firing webs to slow the creature down. Bruce, any ideas? He called out, dodging the gamma-enhanced soldier's massive fist. Bruce's mind raced. He couldn't just let these men die, but he couldn't allow them to rampage either. If their gamma energy wasn't stabilized soon, they would destroy everything around them. Get them to the suppression chamber, Bruce shouted, pointing to a large cylindrical device in the corner of the room. Say it isn't the only thing in this place that can contain them. Peter nodded and began maneuvering the soldiers toward the chamber, using his agility to stay ahead of their sluggish but powerful movement. Meanwhile, Bruce ran to the control panel, his fingers flying over the keys as he activated the containment protocol. The massive chamber roared to life, energy fields sparking as they tried to lock onto the soldier. But the gamma radiation was too unstable. The chamber wasn't designed to hold this much power. Bruce cursed under his breath. It's not going to hold. Peter swung down next to him, breathless. What do we do? Bruce's mind raced. There was one option, but it was dangerous for both of them. He would have to absorb the gamma radiation from the soldiers into himself. It was a gamble, one that could push him over the edge, but it was their only shot at saving these men. I'll have to absorb their gamma energies, Bruce said, his voice low, almost defeated. Peter's eyes widened. Are you sure that's a good idea? I mean, no offense, but that sounds like a Hulk-level disaster waiting to happen. Bruce nodded grimly. I know, but it's the only way to save them. Peter hesitated, then nodded. Oh, okay. What do you need me to do? I'll need you to set up a gamma suppression field, Bruce explained. It'll help regulate the energy as I absorb it, but once I start, there's no going back. Peter's jaw tightened, but he didn't flinch. Ari, got it. Let us do this. Together, they moved quickly, setting up the suppression field with the limited equipment they had at their disposal. Bruce could feel the tension building in his chest, the anticipation of what was about to happen weighing heavily on him. He had fought the Hulk for years, trying to keep him under control, but now he was willingly about to invite that power in tenfold. Peter finished rigging the device, and Bruce stepped into the containment chamber. He took a deep breath, his muscles tensing as he prepared for the surge of gamma energy. The soldiers, still growling and struggling against their own bodies, turned toward him, their eyes glowing with unbridled rage. Okay, Banner, Peter called from the control panel. Found you were good to go. Just try not to explode. Okay. Bruce let out a shaky breath and closed his eyes. He could feel the gamma radiation pulsing through the air, the energy vibrating against his skin. Slowly, he extended his arms, reaching out toward the soldiers, pulling their energy toward him. The gamma energy surged toward Bruce, a force like a tidal wave crashing into him. His skin tingled, the air around him thickening with the unbearable pressure of it all. He had absorbed gamma radiation before become the Hulk because of it, but this was different. This time the energy wasn't his own. It was wild, chaotic, and uncontrollable, trying to rip through him as though it had a mind of its own. His muscles clenched, veins bulging as the gamma energy fought to break free. The Hulk stirred within him, the familiar growl rumbling in his chest. The beast was always there, lurking just beneath the surface, waiting for the smallest crack in Bruce the control to tear its way out. And now with this much power being forced into him, Bruce wasn't sure if he could hold it back. The soldiers, their bodies, now almost entirely drained of gamma energy, collapsed one by one, their monstrous forms slowly reverting to something more human. Their breathing steadied, the wild glow in their eyes dimming as the immediate danger passed. But as the soldiers stabilized, Bruce's own stability crumbled. Peter watched from the control room, his fingers twitching over the suppression field control. Bruce, talk to me. Are you okay? A voice cracked with words. Bruce couldn't answer. He was on his knees fighting to keep his body from transforming. The Hulk roared inside him, clawing at the walls Bruce had built to keep him contained. It wasn't just the power. This time it was the rage, the unrelenting fury that came with it. The Hulk wanted out, and Bruce didn't know if he could stop him. Bannerbeater's voice was louder now, more insistent. Yeah, I can increase the suppression field, but I don't know how long it'll hold. Bruce clenched his fists, his nails digging into his palms. How could I increase it yet? Sorry, he managed to grunt through gritted teeth. Dave, I can't control it. He wasn't sure if that was true. He wasn't sure of anything anymore. The only thing Bruce knew for certain was that if he let go, if he allowed the Hulk to take over with all this gamma energy fueling him, there might not be a facility left standing by the end of it. There might not be anything left at all. Peter hovered his hand over the controls, ready to act if things went sideways. Just give me the word, Bruce. The room felt like it was spinning, the world narrowing down to the battle raging inside Bruce's mind. He couldn't afford to lose. Not now, not after everything they could know. Slowly, with agonizing effort, Bruce forced himself to his feet, his muscles trembling under the strain. Almost there, he whispered, more to himself than to Peter. The soldiers were all unconscious now, their bodies stable. The gamma energy that had once twisted them into monsters was now inside Bruce, barely contained. He needed to release it, but he couldn't do it. Here, the suppression chamber wasn't built to handle this kind of power, and if it failed, they'd be right back where they started, only worse. We need to get out of here, Bruce said, his voice low and strained. Peter nodded, already moving. I'll get the soldiers to safety. You focus on keeping yourself in one piece, okay? Bruce barely acknowledged him. His focus was slipping, the Hulk pushing harder, angrier. the beast furious at being denied its freedom. Every second that passed was a battle, every breath a test of his willpower. The facility groaned as they moved through it, the walls shaking with the residual energy of the experiment. Peter worked quickly, webbing the unconscious soldiers to safety as he moved them out of the gamma containment chamber. The moment they were clear, Bruce stumbled out, his body burning with the strain of holding back the Hulk. He couldn't keep this up for long. Peter swung back down to him, landing lightly by his side. Sighed, "We need to get you somewhere safe, where you can release the gamma energy without blowing up half the desert." Bruce nodded, but his thoughts were a blur. He had only one option, the nearby mountain. If he could get far enough away, he could release the energy safely without endangering anyone else. "Right for now." See, Bruce rasped, "Frey, I need to get to the mountain." Peter didn't need to be told twice. He shot a web line to the nearest wall and swung Bruce the arm over his shoulder. Hang on, big guy, I've got you." Together, they moved as fast as they could, Peter swinging them both across the desert landscape toward the distant peak. The night air was cool, a stark contrast to the burning heat coursing through Bruce's veins. His vision blurred, sweat dripping from his forehead as he fought to hold on. The mountains loomed ahead, jagged and imposing against the dark sky. Peter landed at the base of the largest peak, setting Bruce down gently.
"Okay."
Peter said, breathless.
True.
"This is it. You ready?" Bruce wasn't ready. He would never be ready for this, but there was no choice. He had to let go, or the energy would consume him entirely. "I'll manage," Bruce said, his voice barely a whisper. Peter stepped back, watching with a mixture of awe and fear as Bruce began to concentrate, drawing the gamma energy into a single point within his body. The Hulk roared inside him, demanding release, and this time Bruce did trees stop him. The transformation was violent, like a dam bursting. Bruce's body exploded with gamma radiation, his skin tearing and reforming. As the Hulk tore its way out, green lights illuminated the mountainside as Bruce's form grew larger, more monstrous with every second. His skin darkened to an enraged green, his muscles swelling with the uncontrollable power. The Hulk bellowed, the sound echoing across the desert like thunder. The gamma energy pulsed through him, crackling and shimmering in the night air. For a brief moment, it seemed as though the Hulk might destroy everything in his path. But then, slowly, the energy began to dissipate. The Hulk, breathing heavily, stood still on the mountainside, his enormous hands clenched into fists. The gamma energy that had once threatened to tear Bruce apart now radiated outward, dispersing harmlessly into the atmosphere. Peter watched, wide-eyed, as the Hulk's massive form began to shrink, the green glow fading as Bruce regained control. The transformation reversed itself, muscles shrinking, skin returning to its normal shape. When it was over, Bruce was kneeling on the ground, panting, his body soaked in sweat. Peter approached cautiously, his heart still pounding.
"Bruce, you okay to..."
Bruce nodded weakly, his breath ragged. "Yeah, I think so." Peter let out a long breath, a grin spreading across his face. "Ari, that was insane, but you did it." Bruce managed a tired smile. "Thanks for sticking around." Peter helped him to his feet, the tension finally easing. "Hey, you don't get rid of me that easy. Besides someone's gotta make sure you don't Hulk out and destroy the plate." Bruce chuckled weakly. "Yeah, good thing you were here." They stood together for a moment, the cool desert wind washing over them as the danger passed. But even as they caught their breath, Bruce's mind was already racing ahead. The soldiers were safe for now, but the experiment had left scars that wouldn't heal easily. And the people behind it, the ones pulling the strings, were still out there.
"Peter," Bruce said quietly, "this isn't he over there."
Still a lot we don't know about what happened back there. Peter's expression sobered. "Yeah, I figured. You think the people running this thing are going to come after us?" Bruce nodded. "I didn't bet on it, but we'll be ready for them." The weight of their shared responsibility settled between them, but it no longer felt like a burden. It felt like a promise to each other and to the world they had vowed to protect. As they walked back toward the facility, the first rays of dawn began to break over the horizon. The fight wasn't over, not by a long shot, but for now, they had won this battle, and together they'd be ready for whatever came next.